Chapter 380. The southern wasteland was a forbidden area, even for the people of southern region. A majority of people didn't know much about it. Many people used to call it southern barbaric land. The people of the southern wasteland were called barbarian people, or simply barbarians. The barbarians didn't have very friendly relations with the people of the southern region. The two sides were always fighting a battle for survival with each other. Fierce wars would often break out between the two sides. Small skirmishes were an everyday matter. Yi Shiwen hadn't anticipated that had entered the southern wasteland during his pursuit of Zhu Tianzong. He had arrived in the vicinity of the 100,000 mountains whilst immersed in this desolate region's thoughts. Yi Shiwen opened his devil wings and flew into the southern wasteland. He entered the depths of 100,000 mountains after flying for more than a day. Wow, I never thought that I would see a northerner here. Yi Shiwen was flying in the sky when he suddenly heard a puzzled voice. Yi Shiwen immediately stopped. And sure enough, there appeared a few ferocious-looking barbarian people not far from him in the sky. There were a total of 5 people. All of them were experts of Legendary's great complete realm. They were headed by a man with restrained aura, but profound martial power. He was an extremely profound expert of Legendary's great complete realm. He looked more than 30 years old and approximately 2 meters tall. He had rough facial features and bronze-colored skin. His bronze skin looked lustrous and was glowing brightly in the sunlight. Our elders have asked us to wait here and see to it that no northerner passes from here. And if someone does appear, then we must pursue and kill them. Hee hee boy, blame your bad luck for putting you in this situation. The chief barbarian grinned fiendishly as he gazed at Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen didn't want to engage them. He was in a hurry and must keep chasing after Zhu Tianzong. However, the words of the chief barbarian had made him stop. He felt, could these people have some kind of a relation with Zhu Tianzong? We're so damn lucky. The northerners often keep big treasures on their body. The spoils of war will be our property. A barbarian expert laughed out loud and said, Humph, you're courting death. I'll kill you all, and then search each of your divine sense for information regardless of your relation with Zhu Tianzong. Yi Shiwen made his decision. It was clear from the thought process of these barbarians that they were up to no good. Attack! The chief barbarian shouted loudly. The other barbarians launched attacks one after another. They used their brute strength and launched themselves towards Yi Shiwen. A red-colored flaming big hand slapped across the sky. Fire Cloud's falling sky hand. Are you the people of Fire Cloud Cave? Yi Shiwen recognized this signature martial technique that was practiced by nearly every disciples of the Fire Cloud Cave. However, the degree of power unleashed by this move varied from individual to individual, depending on their ability. Fire Cloud's falling sky hand, when displayed by the Lord of Fire Cloud Cave, could even split the stars and the moon. Hee hee boy, quite the strong eyesight you've got there. However, you're going to die soon. The chief barbarian grinned fiendishly. These experts of the Legendary's great complete realm had shot their Fire Cloud sky falling hand attacks in unison. These attacks condensed into a giant net which blotted out the sky and covered the earth as it rushed towards Yi Shiwen. You're really courting death. Today no one can save you. Yi Shiwen sneered and said. He shot his palm without any hesitation, and his golden divinities began to boil. A golden dragon emerged from the golden divinities. It roared as it looked towards the sky, and then rushed forward. That inescapable giant net was ripped apart by that golden dragon in a flash. It seemed as if the world had lost its color. Those fire-colored hands disappeared without a trace. Bang, bang, bang. Those barbarians spouted blood from their mouths as they were sent flying by Yi Shiwen's attack. You. That chief barbarian looked at Yi Shiwen with disbelief in his eyes. He could clearly see that Yi Shiwen was merely an expert of half-step legendary 8th stage. That was why he had never expected that a single move of Yi Shiwen would be so incredible. However, he had realized that even his own strength that he was intensely proud of was simply nothing in front of Yi Shiwen's. Yi Shiwen didn't hesitate. He shot his golden big hand. Those barbarians got grabbed at once, just like being enshrouded by a massive golden cloud. Bang! 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 These sturdy barbarians of Legendary's great complete realm were then crushed by Yi Shiwen. Then he extracted their divine sense and probed their memories. They might have caused some trouble for Yi Shiwen if he had come across them 2 years ago. Particularly, that chief barbarian wouldn't have been one bit inferior to Yi Shiwen 2 years ago. However, they were no match for the current Yi Shiwen. He had easily clutched them to death. After probing through the divine sense of these powerhouses, Yi Shiwen found out that they were providing support to Zhu Tianzong by helping him in his escape. They were also responsible for taking care of any enemy pursuers. In addition, Zhu Tianzong also had the support of sage experts. Zhu Tianzong wasn't a traitor who had defected from the true martial university. He had always been an undercover agent of Fire Cloud Cave. However, it was still uncertain for what reason he had been summoned back. Otherwise, he could have remained hidden in the true martial university. Yi Shiwen strongly felt that this matter was becoming more and more complex. It might go far beyond his imagination. He must penetrate deep inside the Fire Cloud Cave to kill Zhu Tianzong. The dangers involved wouldn't be small either. Yi Shiwen thought for a moment. He felt that he must complete this mission. However, he couldn't just rush in casually since many experts of the Fire Cloud Cave would be present there. The best way was to disguise as a disciple of the Fire Cloud Cave. Fortunately, he had killed a few already, and they all knew the signature technique of the Fire Cloud Cave. It was impossible for other people to learn an entirely new martial art in such a short time. However, Yi Shiwen could continue to operate the mysterious space to deduce any technique, as long as he had sufficient spirit energy in his possession. Yi Shiwen gradually unfolded the secrets of Fire Cloud Cave's core martial art named Desolate Divine Fire Cloud Technique. After he had poured a great amount of spirit dawn inside the mysterious space, it no longer remained a secret in Yi Zaiwen's eyes. Several other mysterious techniques had also appeared inside Yi Zaiwen's mind. Yi Shiwen had mastered several of their secret techniques in less than half an hour. Yi Zaiwen's body also started to emit the typical aura of barbarians. Yi Shiwen continued to operate the restraining breath technique to not just modify his aura, but also his appearance. His appearance began to gradually transform from delicate to rough. His height also increased significantly. Plus, his body was also emitting the aura, which was very similar to that of a southern barbarian, after having learned the Desolate Divine Fire Cloud technique. Yi Shiwen had come to know from the memories of those disciples of Fire Cloud Cave that several experts of Semi-Sage and Sage Realm were stationed at some distance to ambush the pursuers. These experts were strong enough to possibly intercept the chasing experts of the true martial university, who would soon be arriving here. After knowing this, Yi Shiwen would naturally not walk into their trap foolishly. He would circle around them to go forward. Yi Shiwen had successfully changed his appearance into that of a barbarian expert. After that, he flew all the way along the 100,000 mountains. These mountains were more chaotic on contrary to Yi Zaiwen's imagination. Battles were taking place everywhere. The frequency of coming across a fight here was much higher than it was in the southern region. The division of power in the southern wasteland was quite different from how it was in the southern region. The tribal groups were basically divided into units in the southern wasteland. These groups were affiliated to the major forces. The war between two tribal groups was exceptionally cruel. It was far more brutal than the war between two countries in the southern region. The war between two countries would often take place for overthrowing the opposite regime. However, the war between two tribal groups would often take place to completely eradicate the opposite tribal group. Everyone in the lost tribe would get massacred brutally. This was more intense and brutal, and was fundamentally different from civilized wars that took place between countries. These tribal groups would often act as the subordinate of various forces of the southern wasteland, especially when a war broke out between two forces. He was ambushed several times by the disciples of 100 Barbarians Cave, while he was flying towards his destination. 100 Barbarians Cave was a major force of southern wasteland. 100 Barbarians Cave was one of the several major forces that operated in the southern wasteland. It might even be stronger than Fire Cloud Cave. Both the forces could be considered as arch-rivals. These two forces had always been hostile towards each other, and were constantly indulged in small and big skirmishes. Yi Shiwen discovered that 100 Barbarians Cave and Fire Cloud Cave had been continuously fighting since last 2 years from the divine sense of the disciples of 100 Barbarian Cave whom he had killed. Yi Shiwen had disguised himself as a disciple of the Fire Cloud Cave. It was too obvious from his aura. Consequently, he had to face the ambushes of the experts of 100 Barbarian Cave again and again. He was ambushed by a lot of tyrannical experts, but they all got slaughtered by him in the end. After obtaining this information, Yi Shiwen had to admit that the situation of the southern barbarians was even more chaotic than he had previously imagined. This scale of war would never break out in the 5 regions of the continent, since people were wise enough to consider properly before waging a war on others. However, the temperament of these barbarians was straightforward. These stubborn barbarians didn't use logic before starting a war. Even one bad remark was enough to incite a war between tribes. Once upon a time in the past, 2 enormous forces had indulged in a war because their respective subordinate tribes had an argument over the control of water supply, and that fight between 2 tribes had finally evolved into a deadly war between 2 major forces. However, such chaotic situation was favorable for Yi Shiwen. He could easily fish in troubled waters. The more chaotic the situation, the easier it would be for him to complete this mission. Yi Shiwen flew for half a day and went deeper into the 100,000 mountains. He was using the memories of the disciples of 100 Barbarians Cave and Fire Cloud Cave as a guide to proceed. Yi Shiwen wasn't afraid of getting lost. Far away, a dozen or so barbarian warriors were struggling in a fight against an ominous beast. Yi Shiwen saw that it was a tiger-like ominous beast. Its whole body was covered with long bones that had grown out of its body and had interlocked into a complex structure. This complex bone structure covered its body on the outside, while its skin and flesh were protected on the inside. It was about 10 meters tall. It was a kind of bone beast found commonly in these 100,000 great mountains. It was very rare to find a bone beast in the outside world. However, they were in abundance in these mountains. Yi Shiwen had also seen a lot of them on his way here. Those barbarian warriors were headed by 2 people. One was a man, and the other was a woman. Both were martial warriors. The man had muscular build and looked fierce. The woman looked pretty from her facial features. Her complexion was slightly tanned. The women of Southern Wasteland didn't look fierce and robust like their male counterparts. They could be called wild beauties. These 2 people were extremely profound warriors of Legendary's great complete realm. They had encircled this bone beast from all sides along with their several barbarian subordinates. Their subordinates were also at Legendary's great complete realm. However, they were being forced to retreat by this bone beast gradually as it was very difficult to break its bones. Chapter 381. The bones of these ominous bone beasts were their strongest defensive layer. It was very difficult to break them. These experts of the Fire Cloud Cave bombarded the body of that bone beast with their strongest martial techniques, mostly with the fire cloud's falling sky hand. However, their attacks could barely break its exoskeleton. In fact, their efforts went in vain because its broken bones instantly grew back. This beast was very difficult to deal with. Arg! The bone beast roared. The bones from its body were ejected just like long arrows, and pierced through the vast sky. 2 barbarian warriors didn't get enough time to evade, and the long bone arrows penetrated their bodies. They were nailed to the ground, and their blood splashed everywhere. This caused a rapid loss in their vitality. Damn it. I didn't expect this bone beast to be so ferocious. It seems it'll enter the semi-sage realm soon. The woman who was one of the 2 barbarians leading this team clenched her teeth and said, perhaps, engaging this bone beast was their biggest mistake. The experts in the southern region would often kill demon beasts to obtain their demon cores, or to obtain various other kinds of materials from their bodies. However, their purpose was entirely different from that of the experts of the southern wasteland. These people used to kill these demon beasts for food. However, there weren't many warriors in this region, and the 100,000 mountains was their only reputable source of food. The remnant majority of land in the southern Westland was barren and unsuitable for farming. Therefore, there was always shortage of food. Their only source of food was these ominous beasts found in the 100,000 mountains. Only the most powerful warriors could catch enough prey to ensure the survival of their entire tribe. In the southern region, An expert was considered as a powerhouse by ordinary people. Such experts were considered strong beings in the eyes of the common people. They supposedly belonged to a higher social class and preferred to stay aloof to focus on their cultivation. However, in the southern wasteland, warriors were considered the backbone of the entire race. The survival of the entire barbarian race was dependent on these warriors. In other words, the status of warriors in the southern wasteland was far above that of the experts in the southern region. Yi Shiwen realized that the bone beast had begun to ascend towards the semi-sage realm. Its aura had begun to transform into the aura of a semi-sage beast. No wonder that these people couldn't cope with it. Yi Shiwen thought for a moment. Suddenly, an idea sprouted inside his mind. He shouted, "Brothers and sisters, I'm coming to help you." Yi Shiwen spoke and rushed forward. He shot the fire cloud's falling sky hand move. It swept towards that bone beast to clutch it, just like a flaming cloud. The bone beast promptly faced upwards and roared as it saw Yi Ziwen's attack approach it. The huge bones on its body ejected and darted towards the incoming fire cloud's falling sky hand. Bang! The fire cloud's falling sky hand and the sword-like long bones collided in midair. The bone swords were crushed into pieces. They couldn't resist the might of Yi Ziwen's attack. Bang! The so-called invincible bone beast was bombarded by Yi Ziwen's fire cloud's falling sky hand. Its body was disintegrated and turned to blood fog. The robust and strong exoskeleton, it was so proud of, couldn't resist the blow of Yi Ziwen's gilded tyrant form. It was pulverized in the blink of an eye. The warriors of the fire cloud cave were shocked. They couldn't believe their eyes when they saw how the bone beast was unable to block a single move of Yi Ziwen's, and was killed in an instant. It had been no match for Yi Shiwen. They, on the contrary, had been forced to retreat. They had never anticipated that this frail-looking person would turn out be so powerful. Yi Ziwen's height had increased significantly in this disguised form. However, his build was still somewhat lacking as per the standards of barbarian people. He would only be considered a little man by them. The strength of these barbarian people was often distinguished on the basis of their size. A warrior with a bigger stature would often turn out to be more ferocious and powerful. These barbarian people were elite warriors. They were well versed in the art of war. They naturally weren't shallow people. However, this millennia-old stereotype had always run strong among them. The male warrior who was leading the team regained his composure. He promptly stepped forward and spoke. "On behalf of the entire Yang tribe, I, Yang Hong, am deeply grateful to you for saving our lives, brother. You've done us a big favor." Yi Shiwen didn't find the names and surnames of these people strange. The 4 wastelands and the 5 regions were often engaged in war. But one had to admit that the 5 regions were culturally advanced than the 4 wastelands. The barbarian tribes of the 4 wastelands used the same names and surnames, which were prevalent in the 5 regions. The stronger barbarians would take high-class surnames for themselves. Haha, there's no need to thank me. Aren't we the disciples of the same cave? We should stick together and help each other? Yi Shiwen laughed out loud in a straightforward manner. The aura of barbarians was overflowing from his body. He appeared like a barbarian person. Yi Shiwen exchanged greeting with them, and came to know that these warriors belonged to the so-called Yang tribe. They had come out hunting for the sake of gathering rations for their tribe. They were the strongest warriors of their tribe. Their entire tribe would have been razed to the ground if they had died. Their tribe wouldn't have been exterminated by the ominous beasts but by the other tribes. Therefore, Yang Hong's gratitude was genuine and understandable. Yi Shiwen wanted to take advantage of the Yang tribe to sneak into the Fire Cloud Cave. The Yang tribe had always maintained good relations with the Fire Cloud Cave. However, a sudden burst of rainbow light shone in the sky before Yi Shiwen could speak about the Fire Cloud Cave, and a barbarian appeared treading on it. He arrived in front of the warriors of the Yang tribe. He looked arrogantly towards everyone and said, "I have brought an order from young Master Shi. He wants the experts of the Yang tribe to proceed towards the river Agate Mountain at once. There's an important task that needs your cooperation." Then that barbarian expert turned around. He rode on the rainbow without any delay, and disappeared before everyone's eyes. "It's Shi Jiming again." The female leader gritted her teeth and spoke. Yi Shiwen had come to know that this female warrior was Yang Hong's younger sister. Her name was Yang Na. Something bad happens every time he summons us. I don't know how many of our Yang tribe's warriors will remain at this rate. Yi Shiwen had come to know about this Shi Ming character from the memories of the Fire Cloud disciples he had slaughtered earlier. As per the rules established by the Fire Cloud Cave, different elders were in charge of different areas. The elder of a particular area held the fate of everyone in that region. Every tribe in a region must obey the orders of their elder. No one could go against their elder. It was an exceptionally strict hierarchy, and was dependent entirely on power for control and management. And that was why the backing strength of the elder of an area often came from the strongest tribe of that region. This area was controlled by the elder who belonged to the Shi tribe. And Shi Jiming was the son of Elder Shi. So he often rode roughshod over people of this area, and nobody could stop him. Yeah, but we'll have to go anyway. Yang Hong heaved a sigh and muttered. Shi Jiming never summoned them to attack any tough ominous beast, but to fight territorial battles with other tribes, or to compete for various treasures. Small tribes like theirs were often used as cannon fodder. However, they'd have to participate even if they knew the truth. The loss of lives would be inevitable if they were to answer the summonses. But they might get slaughtered by the Shi tribe if they were to turn these summonses down. This was a big problem. If Brother Yang doesn't mind, I'd also like to join you guys. Yi Shiwen offered with a laugh. The warriors of the Yang tribe looked at Yi Shiwen in astonishment. Most people would want to run and hide in the wake of such summons. They weren't foolish. They knew that they'd be used as cannon fodder. However, they'd have to serve these summonses for their tribe's safety. However, Yi Shiwen wasn't involved in this mess. It was unnecessary for him to go on this deadly mission. Sure, brother. Yang Hong patted Yi Ziwen's shoulder. He seemed somewhat excited. The barbarians were uncouthly people, but they were quite straightforward and frank in demeanor. Yi Shiwen would have been suspected for scheming something if he were to act like this in the southern region. However, this was southern wasteland. He was just another good and loyal fellow warrior in the eyes of these barbarians. Of course, no one would object if Yi Shiwen wanted to come along. They had witnessed Yi Ziwen's tyrannical strength. In fact, Yi Shiwen had single-handedly saved them when their entire team had been cornered by that bone beast. That bone beast hadn't stood a chance against Yi Shiwen, and had been conveniently crushed to death. The level of Yi Ziwen's fire cloud's falling sky hand move had baffled them. His was a wide range and profound attack. Their own attacks wouldn't come even close. It was a martial art technique that was easy to learn, but hard to master. They could only use the fire cloud's falling sky hand move in coordination with other martial art techniques. However, the same technique had displayed incredible might when wielded by Yi Shiwen. In their opinion, Yi Shiwen was an expert from a big tribe. He had probably come out on a traveling adventure. They had noticed his style and conduct. They could tell that he didn't belong to a small tribe. The most important thing for an ordinary small tribe wasn't to expand or to dominate the world. Instead, it was to ensure their survival. Food was always a scarce resource, no matter what time of year it was. This bone beast could be considered as a very valuable source of food for any small tribe. However, Yi Shiwen had casually crushed it to bits without any hesitation. Moreover, this beast wasn't a stint. This showed that he must be from some big tribe, where there was no scarcity of food. Everyone envied him in their heart, but they didn't say anything. Yi Shiwen didn't know that merely blowing off a bone beast would lead these people to assume so much about him. He merely wanted to go with them. He naturally had his own plans. Only Yang Hong and Yang Na responded to the summons from this team. The other warriors returned to the Yang tribe with their deceased comrades. Yang Hong and Yang Na were the most powerful warriors in their tribe. So it was enough that they were going. They trod on the rainbow lights, and arrived before the river Agate Mountain, as that barbarian messenger had told them. Yang Hong, Yang Na, what are you up to? Are you trying to disrespect young Master Shi? A snort sounded as soon as the three of them stepped down from the rainbow lights. Chapter 382. Yang Hong, Yang Na, what are you up to? Are you trying to disrespect young Master Shi? A snort sounded as soon as the three of them stepped down from the rainbow lights. A tall figure appeared from afar. It was treading on the rainbow light. He had a robust physique and was 10 feet tall. His bronze-colored skin was faintly glowing thanks to the real elemental energy flowing within. A trace of fluctuating world principle was also present on his body. He had reached the extremely profound level of Legendary's great complete realm. He was half a step away from entering the semi-sage realm. He was exceptionally powerful. He was even more powerful than Yang Hong and Yang Na. Humph. Lei Yangyin, whether we've tried to disrespect young Master Shi, it's not something you can comment on. Yang Hong stepped forward and retorted with a sneer. Yang Hong's strength was inferior to this man, but he didn't seem afraid of him. Humph. You're talking big. You all would have been slaughtered if your Yang tribe wasn't a servant tribe. Lei Yangyin smiled coldly and said. It was clear that he held a deep grudge against the Yang siblings. No wonder he had blatantly touched a sore spot. Why did you bring an outsider? This man isn't a warrior of your Yang tribe. Lei Yangyin glanced coldly at Yi Shiwen and said. He's a big benefactor of my Yang tribe. He's also a disciple of the Fire Cloud Cave. So, why can't he participate in young Master Shi's summons? Yang Hong asked without showing any weakness or hesitation. What a timely coincidence to have found a disciple of the Fire Cloud Cave to help you. This time, young Master Shi has summoned the local tribes only, not the outsiders. Even if we do encounter any outsiders, we must hide this matter from them at all costs. But instead of hiding it from the outsiders, you've brought one. We haven't gathered here to celebrate or fornicate like bandits. This matter is of utmost importance. Lei Yangyin sneered and counterattacked with his words. Actually, it was rare to come across such a sharp-mouthed barbarian. Moreover, our young Master Shi is so strong that even seizing the burning sun and melting it is a small matter for him. Why should we take the help of an outsider? Do you think that we are incompetent? You. Yang Na's complexion turned red. Lei Yangyin was a rare barbarian who knew how to take advantage of his sharp tongue. He had left the Yang siblings speechless by using only a few words. Yang Na wanted to refute him. However, she didn't know where to begin from. What you're saying isn't right. Why, I can't help. When you say that young Master Shi has ordered to conceal this matter from outsiders, do you mean that his summons don't enjoy the popular support of the people? Is that why he's being forced to do it in secret? What's he up to? At this time, Yi Shiwen finally spoke. Lei Yangyin was indeed a sharp-mouthed barbarian in comparison to others like Yang Hong and Yang Na. However, he was nothing in comparison to Yi Shiwen. It's always easy to tag somebody with unfair label. Anyone can do it. I didn't mean that. Lei Yangyun's face was flushed when he heard Yi Ziwen's argument. He looked fiercely at Yi Shiwen, wishing he could swallow Yi Shiwen whole. He considered himself the best when it came to using sharp-mouthed arguments to his advantage, at least among the barbarian people. So he didn't expect that Yi Shiwen would say such harsh words in reply. He hadn't expected that Yi Shiwen would find a loophole in his own argument, and would use it against him to openly shame him. You get lost from here. Lei Yangyin's eyes emitted an ominous glint as he looked towards Yi Shiwen. He didn't say anything further once he fell in the disadvantageous position in this war of words. Instead, he switched back to displaying the barbaric trait of letting his fist do the talking. Outsiders are not allowed to stick their nose in this matter. I dare you, say one more sentence and I'll kill you without amnesty. Now get lost. Yang Hong had informed Yi Shiwen about several things recently. Initially, there was only a small friction between this Lei Yangyin and their Yang tribe. Generally, they were constantly involved in small skirmishes. However, they all had ended in the Yang tribe's defeat, more or less. That was because Lei Yangyu was much stronger than the siblings. Moreover, the most important thing was that he took advantage of Shi Jiming's favor to do whatever he wanted. This had also boosted his arrogance. He would look to cause trouble for Yang tribe wherever and whenever he could. So this wasn't about his mistrust on an outsider like Yi Shiwen. Instead, he was deliberately looking for an opportunity to cause trouble for the Yang tribe. Yi Shiwen listened to Lei Yangyun's threat, but he wasn't afraid. He merely sneered twice and replied, "Who do you think you are? You dare to bark in front of me? I, Yi Morin, have walked for many years among these 100,000 great mountains. There isn't anyone who hasn't seen me. Today in admiration of young master, sure I've especially arrived here to help. But a dog like you dares to humiliate me. If not for giving face to young master, sure I would have already slapped you to death. Many barbarian warriors of the local tribes were present in the surroundings. They secretly felt delighted after when they heard Yi Ziwen's rebuke. This Lei Yongyin relied on Shi Jiming's support to act arrogantly with everyone. He looked down on everyone and bullied them. He used small and insignificant matters as a catalyst, and even went as far as issuing the order to extinguish an entire tribe if he felt like it. In everyone's opinion, this Lei Yongyin was a nasty villain who was drunk on power. Someone who had let the success get to his head. They had always despised him, but they couldn't do anything because he had Shi Jiming's support. They couldn't afford to offend Shi Jiming. Consequently, they also couldn't offend him. However, someone had appeared who was giving Lei Yongyin a taste of his own medicine. So they couldn't help but be secretly thrilled. You're courting death. Suddenly, a fierce beam of light flashed inside Lei Yongyin's eyes. Nobody had ever dared to humiliate him like this. Even though everyone considered him as Shi Jiming's lackey, no one had ever dared to speak those words of truth in front of him. He usually maintained a proud and complacent appearance. You probably don't know whose territory you're in. Today, I'll send you off to see the barbarian god. Lei Yongyin had pulled out his lance while he in the middle of his speech. The lance in his hand emitted ice-cold black rays of light. He then pointed it towards Yi Shiwen, and a terrifying aura began to surge throughout his body. People regarded Lei Yongyin as a sharp-mouthed lackey of Shi Jiming's, but he possessed intrepid strength. His body was faintly emitting the trace semi-sage level aura. This meant that he had entered halfway into the semi-sage realm. Young siblings often suffered losses at the hands of Lei Yongyin. Shi Jiming was one of the reasons for this. However, the most important reason was that Lei Yongyin's possessed tyrannical strength. An ordinary expert of Legendary's great complete realm was no match for him. Bang! The sharp lance caused the surrounding space to collapse as it wantonly advanced forward with barbaric power. It appeared just like a long dragon that had been urged by Lei Yongyu to go wild. As if adding the finishing touch, that dragon went completely berserk like a real dragon. That black lance appeared like a long black dragon that blotted out the sky and shrouded the earth as it swept towards Yi Shiwen. This lance was made of extremely high-quality material, and the inscriptions on its body contained traces of sage power. An ordinary expert of Legendary's great complete realm could only escape when faced with the semi-sage level power of this lance. But any attempts to resist would simply make them fall under through suppression of the lance's might. But unfortunately, it had encountered a target like Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen shot his fire clouds falling sky hand without any hesitation as he faced the approaching long black dragon. Yi Ziwen's attack was overbearing and contained tyrannical power. It began to burn down everything around it. It advanced towards that long black dragon to grab it. Bang! That huge fiery cloud and the black light collided ferociously. It seemed as if the world had lost its color, and everyone had entered a dreadful world of red and black. The red cloud and the black beam had collided violently. The horrifying power of unimaginable proportions wantonly spread out from the center of collision in all directions. This set off storm waves everywhere. The space couldn't bear such a horrifying power, and collapsed in the wake of this energy storm. The space would then restore itself, but once again got shattered by the storm. This was a terrible scene. The process of continuous reconstruction and destruction of the space. Everyone was dumbstruck. They promptly retreated to avoid getting crushed by the devastating force of such terrifying power. Everyone looked at these two men with a look of amazement in their eyes. They had never thought that the clash between these two could be so terrifying. Lei Yongyun was annoying according to those barbarian warriors, but his strength was still tyrannical. In fact, he was probably the first person under the age of 50 who had managed to get close to semi-sage realm. This meant that he didn't have any rivals under the age of 50 in the region. They weren't sure about whether he had any opponent or not, but everyone accepted that he was extremely tyrannical. However, Yi Shiwen hadn't fallen into a disadvantageous position in this fight. Everyone was astonished. It seemed as if they were witnessing some inconceivable miracle. However, the Yang siblings weren't affected by the sight of this. Previously, they had seen how Yi Shiwen had effortlessly killed that bone beast that was about to enter the semi-sage realm. It has been slaughtered by Yi Shiwen in an instant. That was sufficient to judge Yi Ziwen's tyrannical strength. No, it wasn't so. Soon, everyone discovered something that sent chills down their spine. They noticed that Yi Shiwen hadn't fallen into the disadvantageous position. Instead, he had obtained an upper hand in the battle. His fire cloud's falling sky hand crushed the black layer of energy formed around the lance, and exposed its real body. However, Yi Shiwen didn't hold back, and guided his fire cloud's falling sky hand to further grasp the lance. The defensive layer surrounding the lance broke, and the black lance was seized by Yi Ziwen's flaming hand. Bang! Yi Ziwen's fire cloud's falling sky hand seemed like a heavenly hand that had descended to the mortal world to punish these barbarian people. The black lance was grabbed and broken into tiny fragments. Puff! Lei Yongyun's entire body shivered, and he suddenly spouted a mouthful of blood. Yi Shiwen had grabbed and broken the fragment of his soul that was concealed inside the lance. He could no longer control the lance without the fragment of his soul. Anyways, the lance had already been pinched to bits by Yi Shiwen, and had turned into elements of energy. Lei Yongyun recalled how long he had had to beg his elders in order to obtain this divine weapon. He had finally requested a great master in the tribe to create one just for him. He had nearly spent his entire savings to gather the myriad of expensive materials that were required to forge it. However, Yi Shiwen had crushed it to bits. This was like having a knife inserted in one's chest, leaving the body to drip blood, drop by drop. Puff! Lei Yongyun's entire body shivered once again as he spouted more blood from his mouth. This had happened due to the physiological impact of this invaluable loss. Chapter 383. Everyone was dumbstruck. Nobody had thought that Yi Shiwen would defeat Lei Yongyun's offensive in just one move. Lei Yongyun's attack was nothing in front of Yi Shiwen. He had crushed it as if it were a child's play for him. My brethren of Lei tribe, go ahead and kill him for me. Lei Yongyun bellowed. More than a dozen individuals, each possessing tyrannical aura, appeared in the surroundings. Each of these individuals was at Legendary's great complete realm, and possessed tyrannical strength. Their intrepid barbaric auras had spread across the vast sky. Each of these individuals was a rare expert. The experts of the Lei tribe were twice as powerful as the experts of the Yang tribe. However, none of these experts was at semi-sage realm. A semi-sage expert wasn't comparable to a sage expert. However, it could be said that a semi-sage expert touched upon the word sage, and was inherently different from ordinary mortals. Presently, almost all semi-sage experts had been sent to the front line to fight in the war between 100 Barbarians Cave and Fire Cloud Cave. But one could tell that the Fire Cloud Cave had an exceptionally deep background by merely looking at these profound experts of Legendary's great complete realm. Each of these individuals was capable enough of running rampant in a small area. Presently, all these experts were gathered here. It was clear that the Lei tribe was one of the biggest tribes in this area, and had extremely tyrannical strength. It was certainly more powerful than the Yang tribe. However, Lei tribe was merely a subordinate force of the Fire Cloud Cave, nothing more. These so-called major forces were visibly incredible. The Yiyuan school was nothing in front of these forces. Yi Shiwen felt very glad that he had left the Yiyuan school. Otherwise, he would have never gotten this exposure, and would have remained a small bird in the nest called Yiyuan school. The experts roared in unison after they heard Lei Yongyun's bellow. Their secret arts were unleashed in a flash. Endless divine beams illuminated half of the sky momentarily. These were the secret arts of the Lei tribe as well as the Fire Cloud Cave. Many different kinds of secret arts were unleashed by them at once, but they didn't look messy or unorganized. These experts had honed their secret arts thanks to their rich hunting experience. They knew the importance of teamwork during a hunt. They formed a massive and terrifying attack formation, and rushed towards Yi Shiwen. The endless barrage of offensives formed a wild diagram in the sky as their desolate aura swept out in the surroundings. This joint attack was enough to explode an expert of Legendary's great complete realm. Even an expert of semi-sage realm would hesitate to face this kind of a joint attack head-on. These barbarian people were different from the experts of the southern region. The experts of the southern region were often divided into units on the basis of their country. However, the barbarian people were divided into the units depending on their tribes. These units were often small, but the members often shared an unusual bond and sense of unity. Their tribe was the entire world for them. This was an extremely terrifying attack. It was aimed at entrapping and killing Yi Shiwen, without giving him a way out. Humph! Yi Shiwen sneered. He began to operate Great Desolate Fire Cloud Power Technique with all his strength. His body ejected fire-colored clouds that began to boil. A massive amount of majestic aura spread across the sky and condensed into a huge figure behind him. This figure was quite fuzzy, but a lot of people could recognize it. They were left shocked since this figure turned out to be the barbarian god. Many weaker warriors in the surroundings instinctively felt like kneeling down. That was because no matter which tribal group or force they belonged to, they were all descendants of the barbarian god. They had emerged out of the barbarian god Heavenly Temple. Once upon a time, the barbarian god Heavenly Temple was a colossus force. It would often clash with the true martial university in its prosperous times. However, the true martial university declined with the passage of time, and the barbarian god Heavenly Temple split into parts which were now known as Fire Cloud Cave and the 100 Barbarians Cave. Every barbarian believed in the barbarian god and had given them various kinds of martial arts techniques. The barbarians of the southern wasteland shared same beliefs and practiced same martial arts, since they had originated from the same barbarian god Heavenly Temple. However, the same wasn't true for the 5 regions of the continent. The origins of all the martial arts commonly found in the southern wasteland could be traced back to barbarian god, who was said to have taught the martial arts. Therefore, one could condense the phantom of the barbarian god if these techniques were practiced to the deeper level. In fact, one could even condense the real body of the barbarian god. However, it was necessary to comprehend the power technique to the extremely profound level to accomplish that. It had nothing to do with one's strength. It was mainly dependent on the extent to which the power law had been comprehended. Yi Shiwen hadn't condensed the real body of the barbarian god. However, he had condensed the phantom of the barbarian god, as mentioned in the legends. Therefore, everyone's eyes popped out, and they looked at Yi Shiwen in disbelief. It was difficult for them to believe that he had actually condensed the phantom of the barbarian god. To be able to achieve such a feat at his age, it could be said that he was a top genius. The barbarian god roared loudly behind Yi Shiwen's body. Countless fire clouds condensed together to form a red-colored blazing lance in its hand. It was burning in the sky. A terrifying power was surging and boiling throughout its body. Whoosh! The phantom of the barbarian god fiercely shot the blazing lance. It went blazing out. Bang! The blazing lance pierced its way forward across the sky. It seemed as it would destroy the world as it crossed the expansive sky and collided with that wild diagram. Rumble! That blazing lance unleashed a terrifying rainbow light which effortlessly pierced through that wild diagram and destroyed it in an instant. Those dozen or more barbarian experts were violently shaken by the enormous shockwave. They spouted blood from their mouths, and their huge bodies were sent flying upside down. Their robust bodies had been nearly torn apart by the horrifying pressure of Yi Shiwen's attack. Lei Yongyan was watching the scene. The experts of his own tribe were nothing in front of Yi Shiwen. They couldn't even resist a single move of his. It was simply unbelievable. How can this be? How is this possible? When my Lei tribe's experts of Legendary's great complete realm attack together, even an ominous beast of semi-sage realm will have to run for shelter. It won't dare to fight when faced with this kind of an attack. Otherwise, its entire body will be torn apart by this terrifying force. Lei Yongyan couldn't believe this. An extremely frightened look appeared on his face. There wasn't just a look of disbelief in his eyes as he looked towards Yi Shiwen, but also bitterness and incomparable hatred. Yi Shiwen sneered. Perhaps an ordinary expert of semi-sage realm wouldn't be able to face such a joint attack, and might sustain injuries. However, it was nothing for Yi Shiwen's gilded tyrant form. Even if the opposite party had used a divine tool and bombarded it on Yi Shiwen's body, it still wouldn't have caused any harm to him. Whoosh! Yi Zaiwen's figure tore its way through the vast sky. Suddenly he appeared in front of Lei Yongyun and grabbed his neck. Bang! Lei Yongyun was thrust into a mountain peak by Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen looked at him coldly and said, "I had told you, don't be pretentious in front of me. I can effortlessly kill you if I want to." Yi Shiwen spoke very casually. This Lei Yongyun was nothing in his opinion. He might have extremely profound martial power, but it wasn't enough in comparison to Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen possessed unimaginable strength. Lei Yongyun noticed that his entire body had been embedded into the mountain peak. It was becoming difficult for him to breathe. The oxygen was getting less and less, and he had already begun to lose consciousness. The lack of oxygen was making him crazy. The barbarians present in the surroundings looked at Lei Yongyun in disbelief. Yi Shiwen had nearly killed him. They couldn't believe their eyes. This Lei Yongyun had consistently carried the image of a self-proclaimed tyrant for so many years. However, he had been so easily defeated by Yi Shiwen. It was evident that he wasn't Yi Zaiwen's opponent. Yi Zaiwen's approach had been the same as that of other barbarians, brutal, crude and straightforward. The experts of the Lei tribe who hadn't yet fainted managed to catch a glimpse as Lei Yongyun was shoved into the mountain peak. They sighed with sorrow since they secretly felt that they had ended up offending a big shot. They felt as if they had kicked an iron wall. Yang Hong and Yang Na were in extreme shock. They knew that Yi Shiwen was very intrepid, and an average expert was no match for him. However, they were deeply shocked after watching Yi Shiwen in combat, and how he had effortlessly defeated so many experts of the Lei tribe. Yi Shiwen was more powerful than they had imagined. In fact, it could be said that he was countless times more powerful than what they had expected. Well, I didn't know that there was such an outstanding genius in the younger generation. A burst of an applauding sound came from afar, and permeated throughout the world. Yi Shiwen saw a figure approaching in the sky. It was a young man, approximately 20 years old. He had rough facial features. He was tall and sturdy. An intrepid aura was surging upon his body. "Young Master Shi." The barbarians saluted in unison as they saw him approach. This youth was the young Master Shi Zhiming. He was being followed by dozens of terrifying experts of the legendary realm. Those experts were at Legendary's great complete realm. Their imposing aura was spreading out, little by little. Suddenly, a trace of surprise appeared in Yi Zaiwen's eyes as he saw that youth. That youth was at Semi-Sage realm. He was merely at the initial stage of Semi-Sage realm, but his aura had suppressed everyone on the scene. Others simply couldn't look into his eyes under the suppression effect of his imposing aura. Yi Shiwen was the only exception. His divinities could automatically eliminate this kind of suppression. After all, divinity was the power of the gods. They couldn't possibly allow an ordinary mortal to humiliate them. Shi Zhiming had turned out to be more powerful than Yi Shiwen had imagined. He was unexpectedly an expert of Semi-Sage realm. "Good, you're pretty good." Shi Zhiming suddenly laughed and said when he saw that Yi Shiwen stood unaffected under his suppression. Suddenly, Shi Zhiming looked towards Lei Yongyun, who had been thrust inside the mountain peak by Yi Shiwen, and spoke, "You're useless. You made me lose face." Lei Yongyun felt extremely humiliated when he heard Shi Zhiming's words. He got angry, but couldn't dare to make Shi Zhiming more furious. So, he could only get angry secretly inside. He was stubbornly staring at Yi Shiwen, as if he'd kill Yi Shiwen with his glare. Yi Shiwen naturally understood that he must stop since Shi Zhiming, a semi-sage expert, had arrived. Chapter 384. Shi Zhiming hadn't inflicted a small suppression on Yi Shiwen. Presently, Yi Shiwen wasn't capable of dealing with this semi-sage expert, and he certainly couldn't bring out his blood slave under these circumstances. So Yi Shiwen was wary of Shi Zhiming, but he wasn't afraid of him. Shi Zhiming had abandoned Lei Yongyun, as if he were a worn-out shoe. Yi Shiwen secretly felt that Shi Zhiming was indeed a vicious and merciless man when he saw this. Yi Shiwen wouldn't have acted like this if he were in Shi Zhiming's place. On the contrary, if the people of Yi Zaiwen's Qianyu faction were being bullied like this, he would have surely come to their rescue. However, it could be said that Shi Zhiming was an exception by the blunt and straightforward standards of the barbarians. Lei Yongyun had been beaten up quite miserably in front of his eyes, but Shi Jiming had surprisingly showed a pleasant countenance towards Yi Shiwen. But Yi Shiwen wasn't moved by this unexpected turn of events. On the contrary, he had come to hold a negative conjecture about Shi Jiming. How could Yi Shiwen not have understood Shi Jiming's motive? It was obvious that Shi Jiming wanted to win over Yi Shiwen, a barbarian expert who had a bright future ahead of him. Yi Shiwen had condensed the phantom of the barbarian god, so he had definitely proven himself as an outstanding talent. Everyone also knew that Shi Jiming had the ambitions to compete for the position of this region's elder in the future. However, Yi Shiwen wasn't interested since he had his own ulterior motives for arriving here. But he wouldn't have been moved by Shi Jiming even if he were a real barbarian. Yi Shiwen was secretly wary of him. Shi Jiming had abandoned his subordinate in order to rope in a stranger. Some people might think that he was being courteous, but it also showed how unkind and cruel he inherently was. Yi Shiwen sighed with emotion. Once stained with power and authority, even an ordinary barbarian could turn evil. We just obtained the news that sunflower water essence has been found inside the 10,000-year-old cold pond in the Iron Pond Mountain. We'll go to find that sunflower water essence. Everyone shall be rewarded once I get my hands on it. Shi Jiming glanced at everyone and spoke. However, don't blame me for being impolite if you aren't able to find it for me. His fake polite behavior vanished as he said this, and his true colors surfaced. An envious look flashed in everyone's eyes. Sunflower water essence was a superb item. It was quite difficult for such a wonderful item to appear even in 10,000 years. If these experts of Legendary's complete realm could swallow even one, then it could initiate a complete qualitative change within them that would help them in stepping into the semi-sage realm. The biggest problem in stepping into the semi-sage realm was sensing the world principles, grabbing them, and then condensing them into Tao principles within one's body. Several experts had accumulated enough energy over the course of time. Some had even accumulated it to an unimaginable degree. The continual accumulation of energy for hundreds of years would bloat the accumulated energy to a terrifying extent. However, this was useless since the accumulation of energy wasn't enough to have a breakthrough. They could only perceive the existence of world principles to a preliminary stage. In their eyes, these principles looked messy, like a pile of multicolored wool tangled together. They were colorblind and couldn't differentiate between principles. More talented people could see it more clearly. However, no one could see them as clearly as Yi Shiwen. Each and every principle was indistinctly visible to him. In fact, he had already comprehended several of these principles to an enormous extent. Visualizing the real world and the world with the principles was as easy as opening and closing one's eyes in Yi Ziwen's perspective. However, other people didn't have such luck. They must blindly explore the dark in the hope to find and perceive a principle. But it was very difficult to find. However, a 10,000-year-old sunflower water essence was the combination of several principles. It could help them in moving a step forward towards comprehending the world principles by guiding them in the right direction. Perhaps they would step into the semi-sage realm in less than 2 years if they could obtain the sunflower water essence. The sunflower water essence was extremely precious. It could also be used to increase the number of principles within one's body. Apart from helping one in comprehending profound principles, it could increase the number of principles within one's body by 100. And this was a big opportunity to find a sunflower water essence. No wonder why Shi Jiming had summoned them to go together in search of the sunflower water essence. It made sense. Yi Shiwen speculated secretly. Who wouldn't like to have a sunflower water essence? He must look for an opportunity to seize it. He would gain a big advantage with its help when he'd condense principles in the future. But he'd need to get his hands on it first. Yes. Everyone replied in unison. Shi Jiming was walking in the forefront, while Yi Shiwen was right behind him. The barbarian people didn't dare to interrupt Yi Shiwen. They had seen his strength just a moment ago. He was weaker than Shi Jiming, but he was undoubtedly more powerful than any of them. It was impossible for them to defeat Shi Jiming even if they joined forces. And it was similarly impossible for them to defeat Yi Shiwen. Shi Jiming and Yi Shiwen were similar in this regard, at least in their eyes. There was practically no difference. On the way, Shi Jiming thought of every possible method to win over Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen also didn't wish to have a fallout with him at this point, so he feigned politeness as well. They trod on the rainbow light and arrived at the Iron Pond Mountain. Yi Shiwen listened to the comments of these barbarian people during the journey and discovered how Iron Pond Mountain got its name. This mountain was home to a 10,000-year-old cold pond. Water inside this pond was cold and heavy beyond description. Even a drop weighed several kilograms, just like molten iron. Since then, the pond had been called as Molten Iron Pond. Then people started to call this mountain Iron Pond Mountain as time passed. Everyone entered the Iron Pond Mountain atop their rainbow lights. That 10,000-year-old cold pond was as cold as ice. People could feel the chill in the air, even from a distance. However, strangely, the trees on the mountain didn't seem affected. The cold pond was surrounded by a dense forest, but the trees were as hard as gold and iron. Soon, everyone arrived at the shore of the cold pond. They began to wait quietly. The sunflower water essence was a 10,000 years old item formed by the integration of water essence with the world principles. It could even be said to be a natural spirit, as it had a certain amount of spiritual wisdom too. Therefore, they must wait patiently. Nobody dared to step into the cold pond. The reason was quite simple. The cold pond could freeze them to death. Even these experts of Legendary's great complete realm would be directly frozen to death. A semi-sage expert could probably resist the cold inside the pond with the help of the principles within his body, but at the cost of having their strength reduced greatly. Soon, Shi Jiming's complexion turned ugly. That was because another team of experts had arrived after them. This team was headed by a woman. She was approximately 20 years old and had a somewhat oval and chubby face. She had a divine look in her big round eyes and was somewhat dark in complexion. A valiant aura was overflowing from her body. She was surprisingly an expert of semi-sage realm. The experts of the Fire Cloud Cave were suddenly in a state of tumult as they watched these people arrive. Yi Shiwen also recognized her from the memories of the disciples he had killed. She was an expert of the Fire Cloud Cave's arch-rival 100 Barbarians Cave. However, he didn't specifically know much about her. Who is she? Why is everyone so perturbed to see her? Yi Shiwen asked Yang Hong, who stood beside him. She is the daughter of an elder of 100 Barbarians Cave. Her name is Pan Shui Rong. She enjoys good fame in the younger generation of 100 Barbarians Cave. Yang Hong lowered his voice and said, "This Pan Shui Rong and our young master sure have harbored deep enmity from the beginning. Apart from the rivalry between the 100 Barbarians Cave and our Fire Cloud Cave, it seems like we may have to fight with them." Shi Jiming's complexion had turned exceptionally unsightly. The arrival of the 100 Barbarians Cave's experts was proof that this matter had been leaked out. Moreover, it was such a big leak that it had attracted his arch-rival Pan Shui Rong. He had thought that he'd suppress her after he had obtained the sunflower water essence. However, he didn't expect that she'd receive the news as well. Haha! Shi Jiming let out a hollow laughter. Then he looked at Pan Shui Rong and said, "You've sniffed the news quite quickly. It's like you have the sharp nose of a dog, and a very sensitive one at that." The barbarian expert standing behind Pan Shui Rong became furious at this. Did Shi Jiming just call them dogs? This was a serious insult. Pan Shui Rong's face also revealed a trace of anger as she spoke back. "Do you think that only you're allowed to have such fortuitous encounters? We're determined to obtain this sunflower water essence. It will be a waste if it lands in the hands of a useless person like you." Shi Jiming's face turned ashen. He didn't have a big heart unlike he had always pretended to. Not to mention that the opponent was an old rival. Well, come to know who the useless person is at the end of the fight. Shi Jiming revealed his true colors. He was determined to win sunflower water essence at any cost. However, the opposite party was unlikely to give up either. Talking wasn't the best option here. There was only one way, and that was to let the fist do the talking. This was the most common method used by barbarian people to settle any dispute. The one with the heavier fist would get to have their say. Quite simple, but it was also very effective. "Begin," Shi Jiming shouted loudly. The disciples of Fire Cloud Cave shot a variety of martial arts towards the experts of 100 Barbarians Cave. The experts of 100 Barbarians Cave weren't resigned to be outdone either. They launched their counterattacks without any delay. They had been on alert all along, just like the experts of the Fire Cloud Cave. So they were able to react in time, even though the fight had erupted all of a sudden. Bang! 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 The fight between hundreds of experts shook the entire Iron Pond Mountain. Especially because they were all experts of Legendary's great complete realm. On the other hand, Shi Ming and Pan Shui Rong rose high up into the sky to fight. They weren't suited to fight on the mountain since it would collapse. Poochie! A sharp blade cut across the vast sky with a flash of black light. It then arrived in front of Yi Shiwen. It was aimed straight at him, and was clearly thrown with the intention to kill him. How could Yi Shiwen fall for this sneak attack? He let out a cold shout, and terrifying sound waves scattered in all directions. That black light was dispersed, and an iron dart was revealed. Yi Shiwen stretched out his fingers and grabbed it. Bang! The iron dart was broken into small pieces inch by inch. Chapter 385. Puff! That expert of 100 Barbarians Cave spouted blood from his mouth. The fragment of his soul inside the iron dart had been crushed by Yi Shiwen. Then, a golden ray of light arrived in front of his face. He couldn't do anything but watch its approach. He didn't have strength equal to that of Yi Shiwen. In the end, his head exploded with a bang. This was a terrifying melee warfare. The 100 Barbarians Cave and Fire Cloud Cave had countless years-old enmity. Both the sides were resorting to the use deadly means. Even their leaders weren't holding back. The two of them clamored as they rushed up into the sky and began to fight. Yang Hong and Yang Na were in a similar state. The hatred had taken deep root inside them as well. Bang! 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 Yi Shiwen was shuttling back and forth while everyone was indulged in battle, just like a golden flash. These people were certainly the experts of Legendary's great complete realm, but they weren't his match. Yi Shiwen had deliberately restrained his own strength since he didn't possess any hatred or enmity towards the hidden Barbarians Cave. Anyway, he didn't desire to work himself to death for the Fire Cloud Cave. Ha ha ha, I didn't expect this place to be so lively. A wild laughter sounded from a distant place in the middle of this battle of life or death. A group of people could be seen approaching them from afar. They trod on rainbow lights. This was another team of barbarian people. The experts of the Fire Cloud Cave and the 100 Barbarians Cave stopped fighting as they watched these new people approach. It was as if they had a prior tacit understanding or something. They didn't want the third party to benefit from their fight. These newcomers weren't inferior to the experts of the Fire Cloud Cave and the 100 Barbarian Cave. All of them were experts of Legendary's great complete realm. They were headed by a man who was approximately 30 years old. He was tall and had rough facial features. His nose was crooked by like an eagle's beak. This gave his face a sinister look. A giant black divine eagle had spread out its wings. It was more than 10 meters tall and was circling around him. A trace of sage-level power was overflowing from his body. It was obvious that he was an expert of semi-sage realm. The warriors of the Eagle Cave? How the hell did they arrive here? Yang Hong cursed. Yi Shiwen recalled about the Eagle Cave from the memories of their disciples he had earlier killed. The Eagle Cave was also a major force of the southern wasteland. Strength-wise, it was no less than any of the other two caves. But the most troublesome thing about them was that each disciple of the Eagle Cave used an ominous eagle beast as their mount. In fact, they grew up with their eagle beast. These Eagle Cave disciples were considered as formidable enemies because of the powerful tag team they formed with their pet eagles. These eagles were often very powerful as well. Shi Ming's complexion turned ugly as he flew down from the sky. Clearly, the battle between Pan Shui Rong and him couldn't reach a conclusion. He was very confident that his cultivation would increase dramatically once he had obtained the sunflower water essence. Then he'd be able to suppress his arch-rival Pan Shui Rong. However, the new leak hadn't only attracted Pan Shui Rong, but also a senior semi-sage expert of Eagle Cave, named Ing Da. Ing Da's cultivation was nearly equal to that of the other two. However, he possessed about 200 principles within his body. He was very difficult to deal with. Moreover, his mount, that black divine eagle, was also at semi-sage realm. The molten iron pond started to seem very small as the three giant forces gathered around it. The place seemed packed. However, no one among the three parties took the initiative to begin. Everyone was afraid that the last standing party would benefit from the conflict between the first two. Moreover, the sunflower water essence hadn't appeared yet. Therefore, the three forces were waiting with patience. The surface of the pond was tranquil. Slowly, the curtain of night descended. The sunlight was replaced by the moonlight. The moonlight seemed to be gently caressing the earth. The sound of an internal turbulence started to reverberate from the pond. Everyone knew that the sunflower water essence was about to appear. They knew that it was going to take birth with some spiritual wisdom. That sunflower water essence could become a terrifying force in the future. It could have a chance to absorb the essence of the sun and the moon for thousands of years. However, these experts wouldn't let it. Ripples appeared on the water surface. Everyone held their breath. They didn't dare to make any noise since they didn't wish to scare away the sunflower water essence. Soon, a group of azure-colored water bubbles emerged from the cold pond and took a human form before everyone's eyes. Everyone was spellbound by the peculiar azure color of its body. It was exuding an incredibly beautiful radiance. "Begin!" It was hard to tell who shouted from the crowd, but several hundred experts immediately rushed forward to grab the sunflower water essence. Everyone wanted to capture the sunflower water essence. They couldn't think of anything else in this moment. Greed had prevailed over everyone. Yi Shiwen didn't move. He quietly changed his stature once again. His height had increased significantly. His facial features had turned even rougher. He quietly circled behind everyone. So many people were competing for that sunflower water essence. Moreover, there were 4 experts of semi-sage realm on the scene, including Ingda and his eagle. How could he get the opportunity to grab that sunflower water essence before everyone? Bang! A shocking water column emerged from the tranquil pond. It went straight up into the sky like a massive spear. The bulky column of water blotted out the sky and fell towards the experts who were still in midair. Puff, puff, puff. Several experts didn't get enough time to dodge, and the water column crashed into them. The terrifying force crushed them into fragments. Sad and shrill cries echoed throughout the entire Iron Pond Mountain in the peaceful night. Blood splashed everywhere in the air. In fact, it seemed like blood had rained from the sky. Who was it? Shi Jiming shouted as he unleashed the fire cloud's falling sky hand. His attack pressed down like a huge fire cloud. Bang! The entire water surface of the pond began to boil up. A seemingly endless amount of water vaporized in an instant. At this time, a huge shadow appeared from the middle of the pond. Meanwhile, the sunflower water essence was scared away by the battling experts and submerged deep into the pond. Roar! Suddenly, that black shadowy figure let out a loud roar. It sounded similar to the roar of a dragon. Everyone's gazes finally pierced through dark curtain of night, and they saw who it really was. It was a wicked flood dragon of semi-sage realm. These so-called heavenly treasures were often guarded by all sorts of beasts. This sunflower water essence was being guarded by this flood dragon. The flood dragon must be waiting for this sunflower water essence to mature. It probably wanted to consume it for enhancing its cultivation further. The black scales of the flood dragon appeared ominous under the moonlight. They had frightened everyone. Its ice-cold eyes were like a pair of red lanterns, and were glaring at everyone. Yi Shiwen felt an abnormal and dangerous aura arising from the body of that flood dragon. This feeling was more intimidating compared to what he had felt when he had first seen Shi Jiming and other semi-sage experts. This inborn strange beast was undoubtedly catastrophic. It was very strong. In fact, it could be said that it was hard to find a match for this flood dragon. Its dragon power was overflowing everywhere. It was applying suppression force on everyone in the vicinity. Humans, get lost. The flood dragon revealed its mouth full of steel-like teeth and bellowed. A foul and fishy smell spread in the surroundings and assaulted everyone's nostrils. It also unleashed its demonic energy in the surroundings. Dragons were supposed to be auspicious creatures according to the hearsay. However, there were evil dragons in this world as well. And flood dragons were widely known for their brutal and ferocious nature. I am guarding this sunflower water essence for 500 years now. So you better get lost. Otherwise they'll kill you all. The flood dragon roared as its huge body suddenly slammed against the pond's surface and splashed countless water droplets in the air. The water droplets then fell down from the sky like raindrops. These water droplets were very heavy and weighed up to several kilograms. The weight of falling water reached a horrifying extent when gathered together. Several weak warriors had their bodies smashed by the falling water and sustained severe injuries. Everybody, it doesn't matter how we compete amongst ourselves. But we mustn't lose to this beast. It will be best if we join hands to first kill this beast. Pan Shui-rong stepped forward and suggested. Everyone knew that this flood dragon was very powerful. They couldn't dare to fight head-on with it. It was clear that this flood dragon was also afraid of them teaming up against it. Otherwise, this fierce beast would have attacked and slaughtered them by now. Alright, let's join hands and kill this beast first. Ingda replied in agreement. Now, everyone's gazes turned toward Shi Ming since they didn't know what head choose. Shi Ming struggled a bit, but finally made his decision. He nodded and agreed with the idea of forming a team to kill this flood dragon first. Attack! He shouted, and the fire cloud's falling sky hand swept out from his body. It rushed out and pressed down upon that flood dragon. Pan Shui-rong and Ingda also shot various martial attacks towards the flood dragon. The flood dragon suddenly got furious. It had already taken into account that it wouldn't be able to contend against the combined force of these semi-sage experts. It knew that it wouldn't be able to slaughter them very easily if they joined hands. But it hadn't expected that they'd collaborate to take it down. The flood dragon roared. It opened its big mouth and spat an extremely cold breath. This breath froze everything in the surroundings, including the space. Then the frozen space started to shatter, inch by inch. Bang! This cold breath attack, and the attacks of other experts collided severely. The terrifying energy waves swept out in the surroundings. Yi Shiwen no longer hesitated, and restrained his breath. He stealthily retreated from that chaotic scene. Nobody spotted him doing so. Yi Shiwen carefully walked far away. Now everyone looked like tiny dots from that distance. Then he dived into the pond. He was suddenly struck by the piercing chill, and was left shiver uncontrollably. His entire body froze stiff and sank down. Yi Shiwen secretly thought that this wasn't a good idea. It was much colder inside the pond than outside. He might get frozen to death if he stayed longer in the pond. Luckily, he had activated the resistance. Yi Shiwen had begun to operate his real elemental energy frantically at maximum output. Its output speed was getting faster and faster. Thanks to that, his complexion was gradually restored. His breathing went back to normal. The temperature in the pond was seriously terrible, and the temperature fell by several degrees with every meter that he sank into the depths of the pond. Moreover, it was hard to determine how deep this pond was in reality. Yi Shiwen could faintly hear the fluctuations coming from the surface. These fluctuations had been caused by the battle that was taking place on the surface. However, that couldn't affect the state of water in the pond. Yi Shiwen realized that those fluctuations couldn't penetrate deeper into the pond, probably because of the heavy weight of water. He released his divine sense to look for the whereabouts of that sunflower water essence, which had taken advantage of the sudden appearance of the flood dragon to escape deeper into the pond. It was very difficult for an average person to use their divine sense to search in this kind of an environment. However, it was a piece of cake for Yi Shiwen since he had wrapped his divine sense in divinities. Therefore, his divine sense could spread anywhere with an irresistible force. Eventually, Yi Ziwen's divine sense pinpointed the location of the sunflower water essence. A smile appeared on his face. He stretched out his big golden hand and grabbed the sunflower water essence. Chapter 386. The sunflower water essence was constantly struggling in Yi Ziwen's hands. But it could never break from Yi Ziwen's grasp. Yi Shiwen had control over it since he held it firmly. Yi Shiwen felt a trace of foreign soul inside that sunflower water essence. It probably belonged to that flood dragon. It must put a fraction of its soul inside the sunflower water essence to locate it at any time. Yi Shiwen swallowed the sunflower water essence without any hesitation. He could feel the sunflower water essence dissolve within his body. The high-quality water essence gradually spread throughout his body and repaired a few of his subtle internal injuries. The sunflower water essence itself possessed many principles. Its best function was that it could increase the number of principles inside one's body. The flood dragon was still outside the pond, but he became aware of this matter the moment it took place. It roared again and said, "Bastards! You tricked me by dragging me away from the sunflower water essence. You snatched it away in my absence." The flood dragon released a terrifying dragon breath to force open its way through the crowd of experts. Then its huge body dived into the cold pond, paying no regards to the encirclement of those three forces. The flood dragon was extremely fierce. However, it wasn't a match for this joint force. The opposite party had 4 semi-sage realm experts. The wishes of these 4 semi-sage experts weren't aligned, but they could still inflict enormous pressure on the flood dragon since they were working together. In fact, they could even slay this flood dragon if they could manage to work together as a proper team. The soul of this flood dragon that was present inside the sunflower water essence had been crushed. This meant that it had fallen into someone's hands. The flood dragon had protected it for hundreds of years. How would he not act anxiously to get it back? The flood dragon set off endless water splashes as it dived into the pond. Everyone looked at each other. The flood dragon didn't seem to be acting or faking to them. Did something really happen? However, it didn't matter whether something had happened or not. It was vital to pursue the flood dragon one way or the other. Pursue it. Ingda roared. His divine eagle dived into the pond after him. Pan Shuirong and Shi Ming also dived into the pond. As far as others were concerned, they could only look at each other. They didn't dare to pursue that flood dragon into the pond. They would be frozen to death in the pond since they didn't have the support of the semi-sage principles. Even Yi Shiwen could survive in the pond because of his powerful gilded tyrant form only. The golden divinities had wrapped around him to protect him from the intense chill in the depths of the pond. Yi Shiwen felt that something was swimming down the pond. He guessed that it could be the flood dragon since its soul had been crushed by him. However, Yi Shiwen had already anticipated that. If its soul hadn't been crushed, the flood dragon would have come down by tracing its soul. So Yi Shiwen had made the decision to crush the wisp of its soul, once and for all. Yi Shiwen digested the sunflower water essence and felt that it had moistened his whole body. The biggest advantage of this was his physical quality and aptitude would enhance significantly in the future. It was a rare treasure. Such treasures didn't grow often, even in 10,000 years. Yi Shiwen clenched his teeth and proceeded to face the heavenly tribulation. He had enough strength now. He had planned that he'd look for a place to undergo closed-door training after he had killed Zhu Tianzong. Then, he'd be able to have a breakthrough into half-step legendary 9th stage. His fighting strength would reach semi-sage level in one fell swoop if that were to happen. He was confident that he could condense the principles of semi-sage level, especially after forming his own blood slave. However, he presently wasn't in a position to condense the semi-sage principles. So he had begun to have a breakthrough on the spot. Damn it. You lay your hands on the sunflower water essence by taking the advantage of my absence. The flood dragon roared loudly as it rushed down. There was no living creature inside the entire pond, apart from Yi Shiwen. So he was clearly visible to the flood dragon's eyes, just like a source of bright light in dark night. Puff! The flood dragon roared and spat its terrifying dragon breath. The exceptionally cold water posed no resistance to the dragon breath as it rushed forward. It froze the surrounding water in its path and arrived in front of Yi Shiwen like a long spear with incomparable and frightening might. Kaboom! The ice-cold dragon breath didn't crash into Yi Shiwen's body as the flood dragon had expected. Instead, it was blocked by a blood-red figure that had suddenly appeared in front of Yi Shiwen. It was the blood slave that Yi Shiwen had previously condensed. The red blood exploded beneath the blood slave's feet and propelled its body forward through the cold heavy water like a red arrow. The blood slave arrived beside that flood dragon and launched an attack. The blood slave's fire cloud sky falling hand pressed down upon the flood dragon. Yi Shiwen had condensed this blood slave, and its soul was linked with Yi Shiwen. That's why it could do anything that Yi Shiwen could. Yi Shiwen had comprehended the fire cloud sky falling hand to a very high degree, and the blood slave's attack wasn't one bit inferior to Yi Ziwen's. And the tyranny of this attack had increased countless times since the tyrannical power of semi-sage realm had been added to it. In fact, the blood slave's attack was several times more powerful than Yi Ziwen's own. The fire cloud sky falling hand rumbled on the forehead of that flood dragon. It caused sparks, and a terrifying power began to boil on the flood dragon's body. Bang! The flood dragon's scales were blasted and peeled off by the blood slave's attack. Its scales fell off, and its blood started to gush out. Roar! The flood dragon had been wounded by a single palm attack by the blood slave. It began to scream in pain. Ingda, Pan Shurirong, and Shi Ming had also managed to dive to the pond's depth by now. They saw the flood dragon confronting the blood slave. They began to believe that the flood dragon had been right. Someone had secretly snatched away the sunflower water essence by taking the advantage of their fight outside the pond. The three of them immediately became angry. Ingda cursed out loud in anger. Damn it! I was engaged in a life or death fight above, and you sneaked down here to steal the sunflower water essence. You bastard! Unfortunately, the blood slave couldn't speak or think. It just coldly looked at everyone with a murderous look in its eyes. Bang! The fire cloud sky falling hand appeared again. It overwhelmingly spread out and went towards those three experts to grab them. Fire cloud sky falling hand. The three experts immediately recognized the fire cloud sky falling hand. After all, it was the signature martial art move of the fire cloud cave. They couldn't possibly mistake it for something else. Shi Ming was even more familiar with it than the others. Who are you? How do you know the martial art of our fire cloud cave? Shi Ming became very depressed since the others had started to eye him in suspicion. He wouldn't have been this troubled if he had ordered one of his own to pull this off. But he hadn't. Yet, there was no way to prove it otherwise since the martial arts of Fire Cloud Cave was too recognizable. Damn it! Shi Ming shouted loudly, and shot the same fire cloud sky falling hand in reply. The two terrifying attacks ferociously collided. It appeared as if two gigantic fire clouds had clashed. Dreadful energy waves swept out in the surroundings, and displaced several gallons of heavy water in a flash. You two also attack. Don't just stand stunned like that. This bastard isn't one of my men. Shi Ming retreated several steps before he finally came to a halt. His huge body had been pushed back. He had fallen into a disadvantageous position when faced with the frightening force contained in his opponent's attack. The blood slave wasn't being cautious since it was condensed from a wisp of a star colossus soul. So its body was bound to be extremely formidable and dreadful. Ingda and Pan Shuirong eventually came back to their senses after hearing Shi Ming's shout. They realized that this person might not be one of Shi Ming's men in reality. They didn't hesitate any further, and rushed towards the blood slave. Meanwhile, the flood dragon rushed towards Yi Shiwen since it had failed to deal with the blood slave. It could still feel the sunflower water essence's aura, and it was coming from Yi Ziwen's body. Damn you human! I will kill you! How dare you to steal my treasure? The flood dragon spoke out of anger as it saw Yi Shiwen sitting cross-legged. It had waited for 100 years for this sunflower water essence to mature, and Yi Shiwen had stolen it. The flood dragon roared loudly. The black scales throughout its body, some covered in blood, ejaculated an incredible divine beam. It appeared as if the flood dragon was treading on the waves. It dashed towards Yi Shiwen to kill him. Bang! The blood slave suddenly attacked from a distance even though he had been besieged by 3 attackers of his own. A long dragon went flying towards the flood dragon and crashed into it. It was the coiling dragon palm. The flood dragon was injured and spouted blood. It had been caught off guard by this long dragon. Roar! The flood dragon roared repeatedly. It tried to break free a few times, but was blocked by the blood slave every single time. The blood slave was under the siege of several semi-sage experts. However, it wasn't afraid. It was relying on the toughness of its body that was granted to it by the Star Colossus genes. It wasn't afraid of its flesh being torn off in a head-on combat. Anyway, it wasn't afraid of death since it was condensed from a soul, and was only a small fraction of the whole. Bang! The blood slave's body exploded and scattered. However, its body reorganized itself again. This was the most dreadful ability of the blood slave. It was immortal. It could continue to respawn as long as there were enough spirit dawn to support that. This was why the Devil King had condensed an army of blood slaves, so that he could rule the devil world. And that was why Yi Shiwen wanted to condense a blood slave. It could deal with the occasional enemies that he himself couldn't. The experts were very depressed at this sight. They couldn't do anything to defeat it. They had basically been tied down by the blood slave. They had no way out of there. Hence, they posed no danger to Yi Shiwen, even though he wasn't too far from there. However, Yi Shiwen wouldn't allow the blood slave to face the enemies endlessly. The blood slave could certainly respawn as long as there were enough spirit dawn. However, Yi Shiwen had to burn 50 million spirit dawn for merely condensing a blood slave of semi-sage realm. Therefore, he couldn't support the respawns of a blood slave several times with the leftover spirit dawn. Crash bang! The heavenly tribulation penetrated through the heavy water and bombarded Yi Ziwen's body. Chapter 387. Damn it! This bastard is crossing the tribulation. Everyone could clearly see that Yi Shiwen was the real mastermind behind all this, and not the blood slave. He wasn't far away from them. He was clad in the warrior attire of the Fire Cloud Cave. Shi Jiming was particularly burning with anger since this person was clad in the attire of the Fire Cloud Cave. He must have mixed with the team of Fire Cloud Cave and followed Shi Jiming here. Shi Jiming couldn't tolerate the fact that he hadn't noticed that. Furthermore, he didn't even recognize this person. Yi Shiwen had once again changed his appearance. Therefore, Shi Jiming didn't know that this person was Yi Shiwen. Shi Jiming was preoccupied with rage, since he was blaming himself for being negligent. Yi Shiwen didn't know that someone was going mad because of him. Right now he was sitting cross-legged, and could feel the power seething inside his body. The lightning in the sky struck again and again. The lighting rushed down, and appeared to be capable of seeing. It didn't spread out in the water, and aimed straight towards Yi Shiwen to strike him. The lightning struck Yi Ziwen's body, and caused his real elemental energy to boil even more. However, he knew that it was just an appetizer. Waves and waves of numerous lightning figures crashed down from above before Yi Shiwen could catch his breath. And they struck towards Yi Shiwen. Shi Jiming, Pan Shuirong, Ingda, and the Flood Dragon were present nearby. They were dumbstruck upon witnessing this scene. They couldn't help but think that the heaven was furious, and had sent its heavenly forces to render punishment. An ordinary heavenly tribulation was scary enough, let alone this variant of heavenly tribulation. An ordinary variant of heavenly tribulation was scary enough to kill an average expert. And this one was clearly an abnormal variant. These people hadn't heard about this kind of heavenly tribulation. Such an abnormal heavenly tribulation only existed in ancient books. Yet, now they were witnessing one with their own eyes. This was simply mind-boggling. The groups of lightning figures swept down from the sky. They appeared to be surfing on waves. They appeared extremely terrifying. These lightning figures rushed straight towards Yi Shiwen like ferocious evil spirits. This was the type of heavenly tribulation everyone was afraid of. Because facing a tribulation was like taking a test, and most people did that with inadequate preparation. Hence, they weren't capable enough to cross such a heavenly tribulation. Only an outstanding genius with deep foundation could cross it. For others, it was no different than a deadly tribulation. Yi Shiwen might not have outstanding innate talent. However, his foundation was very profound. He had deliberately restrained his cultivation level over the past 2 years in order to build this deep foundation. Even so, Yi Shiwen didn't dare to look down on this heavenly tribulation one bit. He might suffer a crushing defeat if he were to take this terrifying heavenly tribulation lightly. Yi Shiwen sneered. He rushed up and burst into the crowd of lightning figures like a golden streamer of light. These lightning figures didn't constitute of just lightning apes. Various other kinds of demons were also present in this group. Some had taken human forms, but still retained several characteristics of the demon race. They rushed towards Yi Shiwen as they brandished their weapons. Die! Those lightning people bellowed loudly as they rushed towards Yi Shiwen. Each one of them was armed with sword, spears, clubs, and all other sorts of weapons. The martial arts unleashed by these lightning people were far more tyrannical than the martial arts of the barbarian experts of Legendary's great complete realm. The lightning people formed small teams as they rushed towards Yi Shiwen to kill him. Each unit had enormous might. Yi Shiwen roared. A Han seal smashed down from above. The giant mountain fell from the sky like a huge dragon and smashed down. Many of the lightning people didn't get a chance to begin their attack, and were smashed by Yi Zaiwen's Han seal. They transformed into a group of lightning energy, and were absorbed by Yi Shiwen. The universe inside Yi Zaiwen's dantian made a crackling sound after it absorbed the lightning energy. Yi Shiwen, who now wore 5 layers of tyrant body technique, broke into the crowd of lightning people in one fell swoop and went all out. He shot the fire cloud sky falling hand, and didn't hold back one bit. His blazing big hand rushed forth like a bunch of red clouds, and grabbed a bunch of lightning people. They then got crushed and exploded. Shi Jiming's complexion turned ashen as he watched this scene from the sidelines. He knew that his comprehension of fire cloud sky falling hand was far inferior to Yi Zaiwen's. Yet, somehow, this attack had reminded him of the attack that Yi Shiwen had displayed. However, this man was very different from Yi Shiwen. Whether the comparison was drawn based on appearance, physical characteristics, or aura, he could only blame his luck for encountering 2 experts whose comprehensions of the fire cloud sky falling hand was superior to his own. And he had encountered them within such a short time frame. However, he didn't hold himself back, and continued to attack the blood slave. He and the other semi-sage experts were no fools. They knew that the blood slave could respawn only to some extent, not limitlessly. Wouldn't taking endless rebirths go against the heaven's will? The blood slave was certainly operating by consuming some kind of energy, so they only needed to exhaust it thoroughly. That would automatically bring an end to this fight. Moreover, this must be done before Yi Shiwen was done crossing the heavenly tribulation. Then they could kill Yi Shiwen by taking advantage of his weak condition post-tribulation. A person who could cross such a dreadful heavenly tribulation had to be genuinely talented and intrepid. He couldn't be allowed to live. He would be exhausted after crossing this heavenly tribulation, and it would be their big chance to get rid of him. Bang! Ingdas divine eagle grabbed the blood slave in its claws and smashed it. Yi Shiwen couldn't see or hear them, but he knew their intentions. Both sides wanted to dispose of their respective opponents quickly. Yi Shiwen continued to slaughter those lightning people. Each of these lightning people was as strong as an expert of Legendary's great complete realm. However, they weren't a match for Yi Shiwen. It wouldn't be an overstatement to say that it was rare to find an opponent of Yi Shiwen on the same level in the entire world. He was basically invincible on his level. Moreover, he possessed the formidable gilded tyrant form that made him an even more tyrannical opponent. He rushed into the group of lightning people. He simply disregarded the lightning attacks being launched at him. He grabbed a lightning person with his hand and crushed it. He then absorbed its energy. His strength increased a bit as a result. Yi Shiwen continued to become stronger. Moreover, he didn't stop here. Rather, he started doing 2 things at once. On one hand, he grabbed many lightning people and crushed them. On the other hand, he began to control his real elemental energy to capture the principles in his vicinity. He then started to condense them. He wasn't doing this for the first time. He had done this prior to condensing the blood slave. So it was a child's play for him now. It was uncertain how many principles were captured by him. However, he managed to condense the first Tao principle inside his body. Bang! Yi Zaiwen's aura suddenly began to change after he condensed the first Tao principle. He finally experienced his first qualitative change. The innumerable changes in the past had only been quantitative in nature. It seemed as if an endless amount of water had finally broken through the dam. Yi Zaiwen's body began to entangle the coercion of Sage realm. It was merely the coercion of semi-Sage level. However, there was certainly a huge difference when compared to earlier. This was the beginning of his transcendence of mortal world. A mere step towards becoming a sage. Shi Jiming, Pan Shui Rong and Ingda were in utter shock when they saw that Yi Shiwen had begun to condense principles. They couldn't believe their eyes. They were quite convinced that Yi Shiwen hadn't even reached half-step legendary 9th stage yet. Even the extremely profound experts of Legendary's Great Complete Realm would face great difficulties in condensing principles. They themselves had experienced this in the past, and knew of the challenges that lay in the path. After all, they had also walked on the same path. The most shocking thing for them wasn't that Yi Shiwen was condensing principles. Rather, the most shocking was the fact that he was doing it without even reaching half-step legendary 9th stage. Their eyes popped out as they watched this happen in front of them. They were blown away by this. There was always a certain relation between one's cultivation level and strength, but it wasn't absolute. Yi Shiwen possessed the fighting strength of Legendary's Great Complete Realm, even though he was merely at half-step legendary 8th stage. Yet this wasn't that surprising. However, condensing the principles of semi-sage realm at such a lower level was definitely equivalent to going against the heaven's will. The stages were like floors in a building. A person could see everything on the floor they were on. However, a person on the bottom floor would never understand the feeling of overlooking the earth from high up in the sky. Yi Shiwen was clearly a person who had never left the ground. Yet he seemed to know the feeling of overlooking the earth from the sky. Yi Ziwen's actions and agility skill got imbued with fluctuating world principles as he condensed more and more of them. Now each and every movement of his carried the power of the world. Those lightning people didn't stand a chance against him. He slapped the large group of lightning people with his fire cloud sky falling hand, and killed them all in one shot. As Yi Ziwen's speed of annihilating the lightning people grew more, and more, those semi-sage experts as well as the flood dragon became more and more anxious. That was because they were witnessing the birth of a miracle. Yi Shiwen was unceasingly condensing the principles within his body. He quickly surpassed the preliminary stage of semi-sage realm by condensing 100 Tao principles. However, he continued. Soon, he had condensed 110-120, and then, he finally crossed the 200 mark. Now, he had closed the gap between himself and these experts. However, they felt their hair standing on end when they saw Yi Shiwen condense more principles after the 200 mark. To think that such a terrifying expert was present among them. One who could continuously comprehended more than 200 principles, and that too in one go. God only knows how much effort these people had to put to condense 200 principles. But Yi Shiwen didn't stop. 220. 250. Hurry, let's get out of here. Shi Jiming shouted loudly. He couldn't bear the pressure on his heart, and turned around to escape. They'd end up dead if they waited until the full promotion of Yi Ziwen's strength, since his power would have increased beyond their imagination by then. Not to mention that Yi Shiwen would have the Bloodslave support. The other few experts, as well as the Flood Dragon, turned around to escape after they heard Shi Jiming shout. Want to run away? It's too late for that. A tyrannical aura which clearly surpassed the initial stage of semi-sage realm swept in the surroundings. Chapter 388. Want to run away? It's too late for that. A sneering sound came from Yi Ziwen's mouth. His aura exploded and surged to an exceptionally terrifying extent. Yi Shiwen had condensed about 300 Tao principles inside his body. Thanks to that, his fighting strength had reached the intermediate stage of semi-sage realm. As a result, he had enough fighting strength to stand against the experts who were at the peak of the initial stage of semi-sage realm. Yi Shiwen shot his fire cloud sky falling hand to stop those people from escaping. It formed a mysterious red cloud. It was a lot more exquisite than the one displayed by the Bloodslave. Yi Ziwen's fire cloud sky falling hand had obtained enough energy and essence that it could easily split the mountains. His flaming hand advanced towards that divine eagle to grab it. The divine eagle couldn't evade Yi Ziwen's attack, even after putting all its effort. So, it screamed loudly as it attempted to counter the attack. Its golden wings began to emanate golden rays of light in the surroundings. Its wings flapped several times, and unleashed an overwhelming golden beam. The golden beam rushed forth to tackle Yi Ziwen's fire cloud sky falling hand. Ingda naturally couldn't bear to see that his pet was going to be caught by Yi Shiwen. So he quickly turned around and brandished his long blade. The blade energy shattered the space as it went towards Yi Ziwen's attack. It collided with Yi Ziwen's attack. It seemed as if a meteor had crashed into the earth. The terrifying power unleashed by the collision cracked the space open, inch by inch. Bang! 2 attacks of Semi-Sage Realm had swept out in the surroundings at once. The energy released from the attacks pierced through the mountains and rivers as they crashed straight into Yi Ziwen's Fire Cloud Sky Falling Hand. The Fire Cloud Sky Falling Hand vibrated frantically after it had faced the 2 terrifying attacks at once. Yi Shiwen coldly snorted and pumped more power into his attack. As a result, his blazing hand started to turn more and more golden in color. Ha! Yi Shiwen shouted loudly. He grabbed the golden beam and the blade energy simultaneously. They started to boil and seethe within the grasp of his Fire Cloud Sky Falling Hand. Bang! The golden beam and the blame energy were crushed and got annihilated. Then, the Fire Cloud Sky Falling Hand advanced forward and grabbed that divine eagle without any delay. Don't do it! Ingda roared. He released startling blade energy. It pierced its way through the heavy water and rushed towards the Fire Cloud Sky Falling Hand to chop it down. However, it was too late. Bang! The giant stature of that divine eagle was ruptured because it was crushed by the Fire Cloud Sky Falling Hand. It could only scream before its blood splashed out. In the end, it got turned into a mass of blood fog. No, you bastard! Ingda felt his heart shatter when he saw his several hundred-years-old companion getting crushed to death. His body turned into a streamer of light, and he suddenly arrived in front of Yi Shiwen to kill him. Buried sword secrets. Yi Shiwen let out a cold shout. He congealed a startling sword intention in his hand and brandished it horizontally. The sword intention forged its way ahead. It appeared as if a long dragon was flying across the sky. Pucci! Ingda's blade energy got defeated by the sword intention. Then his entire body was chopped down into pieces by the sword intention. He died on the spot. Pan Shuirong, Shi Ming, and that flood dragon were extremely frightened when they saw 2 Semi-Sage Realm powerhouses being effortlessly slaughtered by Yi Shiwen. They rushed upward towards the water surface with all their strength. How could Yi Shiwen let them escape? He had chosen to cross the heavenly tribulation in the water mainly because he would have had to face several hundred experts of Legendary's great complete realm along with these semi-sage experts, if he had crossed it on the surface. So, how could he possibly allow them to escape? Yi Shiwen sent the blood slave to stop the flood dragon, while he personally chased after 100 barbarians caves Pan Shuirong to kill her. Pan Shuirong panicked when she saw Yi Shiwen chase after her. She quickly turned around and pointed her fingers towards him. Her huge fingers extended towards Yi Shiwen, one by one. It seemed as if a god had descended into the mortal world to destroy it. The fingers shattered the space wherever they went. It seemed as if the world itself was about to disintegrate into pieces. Yi Shiwen immediately recognized this attack. It was a martial art of a small guarding faction of the 100 Barbarians Cave. It was called 100 Barbarians Lurin Fingers. Even a finger could break the world. It was said that this terrifying technique had emerged from the barbarian god's finger technique. It was also said that the barbarian god had once destroyed half of the world with this technique. Yi Shiwen shot his fire cloud sky falling hand once again. It struck those huge pointy fingers. The fingers simply weren't a match for the fire cloud sky falling hand. Bang! 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 The fire cloud sky falling hand grabbed those huge fingers and exploded them. The power of the finger attack wasn't inferior to the power of fire cloud sky falling hand. However, Pan Shuirong's skill was far less than Yi Ziwen's. Yi Shiwen had also learned the method of executing the 100 Barbarians' Lu Ren fingers from the memory of the deceased disciples of 100 Barbarians Cave. However, Yi Shiwen was dressed up as a disciple of the Fire Cloud Cave. So he didn't display a power technique of the 100 Barbarians Cave. Pan Shuirong's fingers were crushed by Yi Shiwen, one by one. She couldn't evade Yi Ziwen's attack, and got slaughtered. He plundered all her wealth from her corpse. Yi Shiwen didn't show her a shred of mercy even though she was a woman. Yi Shiwen rushed towards Shi Ming after he had killed Pan Shuirong. Shi Ming had escaped towards the water surface by now. Shi Jiming convulsed with fear as he saw Yi Shiwen approach closer. He shouted, "No! You can't kill me. Otherwise my father won't spare you. Your father won't find out about this." Yi Shiwen sneered. A Han seal fell from above like a huge dragon. It caught Shi Jiming off guard, smashed his body, and thrust him to the bottom of the pond. The bones in his body had been crushed. Generally, the barbarians had more robust bodies than the people of southern region. However, none were on par with Yi Shiwen. Bang! Yi Shiwen used Fire Cloud Sky Falling Hand and slapped Shi Jiming to death. His body turned into a group of blood fog. Then, Yi Shiwen plundered his wealth as well. The wealth of these semi-sage experts was on an entirely different level when compared to that on the bodies of the experts of Legendary's Great Complete Realm, since they were considered as elites among elites in their respective martial arts schools. So they were bound to have several treasures on their bodies. However, there were no Spirit Dawn on their bodies. Rather, they had possessed Primary Spirit Dawn. A Primary Spirit Dawn was refined from the Spirit Dawn. First, the spirit energy was extracted from the Spirit Dawn. It was then compressed to a great extent, and then further condensed to form Primary Spirit Dawn. It was impossible for the experts below Semi-Sage Realm to condense these high-quality Dawn. It could be said that spirit energy was the smallest unit of energy which was accessible to the experts below Semi-Sage Realm. Only those experts who had condensed the principles of Semi-Sage Realm or above were capable of condensing Primary Spirit Dawn. 10,000 Spirit Dawn were required to condense one Primary Spirit Dawn. The experts of Semi-Sage Realm or higher used to deal in Primary Spirit Dawn only. Otherwise, if they dealt in Spirit Dawn with each other, then the number of Spirit Dawn in an average transaction would reach astronomical figures. Yi Shiwen had obtained more than 20,000 Primary Spirit Dawn from the bodies of these experts. It was a big fortune for him. The wealth of legendary experts was nothing in comparison to that of these semi-sage experts, that too when the comparison was drawn solely on the basis of Primary Spirit Dawn, and not adding the other exotic treasures and magic weapons in their possession. Yi Shiwen rushed towards that flood dragon after he had killed Shi Jiming. He sneered since there was one around to interfere. The flood dragon collapsed under Yi Shiwen and the blood slave's pincer attack. However, Yi Shiwen didn't turn its corpse into blood fog. Instead, he left its corpse intact and stored it in his stock. The flood dragon's entire body was covered with treasures. The dragon's blood could be used to nourish and harvest rare herbal medicines. Yi Shiwen began to operate the restraining breath technique after he had killed the flood dragon, and his appearance transformed into that of Shi Jiming's. He sneered and received the blood slave back. Then he rushed out of the deep and cold pond like a streamer of light. The disciples of all three forces were anxiously waiting at the shore of the pond. However, they hadn't dared to jump into the cold pond. A few impatient disciples had dived into the pond, but had been frozen to death. Diving into this pond was like committing suicide for an expert below the semi-sage realm. But Yi Shiwen was an exception, thanks to his gilded tyrant form. Moreover, the sudden arrival of the heavenly tribulation had scared them. The appearance of all types of lightning figures had terrified them even more. They hadn't come across such a terrifying heavenly tribulation in the past. Such an abnormal tribulation would appear only for a monster who had dared to go against the heavens' will. Otherwise, the heavens would never be so unfair as to send such a dreadful heavenly tribulation. That was because the one facing it would have little to no chance of survival. Forget about witnessing a tribulation like this one. They hadn't even heard about something like this. It was an extremely scary spectacle. They were very worried because they might have to face a one-sided massacre if their leader didn't win. Young Master Shi, young Master Shi. Several experts of the Fire Cloud Cave shouted in joy as they saw Yi Shiwen emerge from the pond. Yi Shiwen nodded blankly. He then said, "Let's get back to the Fire Cloud Cave." "Wait. Shi Jiming, where is our Miss Pan?" The warriors of the 100 Barbarians Cave didn't hold back. They blocked Yi Ziwen's path. "You guys are courting death. Do you want to meet her?" Yi Shiwen shouted coldly. His eyes flashed with killing intent as he continued to pretend being Shi Jiming. A fire cloud sky falling hand appeared and swept towards them for the kill. The 100 Barbarians Cave and Fire Cloud Cave were mortal enemies. It was fairly natural for a deadly fight to break out between them. Bang! These experts of Legendary's great complete realm couldn't evade Yi Ziwen's attack. They were reduced to a mass of flesh and blood by Yi Shiwen. There was no comparison between Yi Ziwen's strength and theirs even before he had jumped into the pond. Let alone now, when he had condensed about 300 principles. Yi Shiwen killed them all in the blink of an eye. Over 200 warriors of 100 Barbarians' cave had been slaughtered. The experts of the Eagle Cave were shocked by this scene. They were deterred by this, and didn't dare to advance forward. Provoking this vicious fiend would be tantamount to courting death. Suddenly, a bad feeling emerged inside their hearts. Ingda should have arrived by now, if he was alive. But he hadn't. On the contrary, Yi Shiwen had. This clearly meant that Shi Jiming had won the fight over the sunflower water essence, and Ingda must have died. They wouldn't dare to provoke Yi Shiwen, for they didn't wish to face the same fate as their leader. Yi Shiwen didn't say anything since he saw the scared faces of the warriors of the Eagle Cave. They were basically speechless. He left with the other disciples of the Fire Cloud Cave. He spared the lives of the Eagle Cave warriors, and allowed them go so that they could spread the news that Shi Jiming had killed Pan Shui Rong. This would deepen the hatred between these two forces, and that would reduce the threat to the southern region. Chapter 389. The Fire Cloud Cave's main altar was located in a top-notch place in the southern wasteland. Countless experts of the Fire Cloud Cave were stationed there. The entire place was brimming with spiritual arteries that ran underground. Thanks to that, the Fire Cloud Cave's main altar was overflowing with spirit energy, and looked like a paradise in the mortal world. The main altar of the Fire Cloud Cave certainly wasn't on the level of the true Martial University, but it was still a top-tier place of immortals. Yi Shiwen moved along with the disciples of the Fire Cloud Cave disguised as Shi Jiming. He then dismissed the team, and went inside the Fire Cloud Cave without any issues, all thanks to his disguise as the son of an elder of the Fire Cloud Cave. Shi Jiming enjoyed a good reputation in the younger generation of the Fire Cloud Cave. Yi Shiwen made his way into the Fire Cloud Cave without any problem by taking advantage of Shi Jiming's reputation. Shi Jiming was a core disciple of the Fire Cloud Cave. The eligibility for becoming a core disciple in the Fire Cloud Cave was same as it was inside the true Martial University. Only Sage Realm experts could be appointed as core disciples. However, Shi Jiming had managed to become a core disciple by taking advantage of his identity as the son of an elder. Yi Shiwen could use his identity as a core disciple to move about freely, and could do whatever he wanted, so long as true disciples didn't come into the picture. Shi Jiming had his own cave mansion inside the Fire Cloud Cave. Yi Shiwen went inside Shi Jiming's cave mansion, and asked one his trusted confidants to look for the whereabouts of Zhu Tianzong. Zhu Tianzong's matter was confidential. However, it was only so for the outsiders. Yi Ziwen's present position was that of a core disciple of the Fire Cloud Cave. So, it should be a piece of cake for him to investigate this matter. Who would think that this person who had the appearance of Shi Jiming wasn't actually Shi Jiming, but Yi Shiwen? Yi Shiwen sat cross-legged, and was immediately surrounded by all sorts of principles he had condensed earlier. Yi Shiwen was doing his utmost to consolidate these principles. Yi Ziwen's accumulation of energy was very deep. After all, he had deliberately suppressed his cultivation for over 2 years, and it had now been unleashed, all at once. This was extremely terrifying. Yi Shiwen had condensed about 300 Tao principles. However, he knew that this was merely the beginning, nothing more. He could attain a complete qualitative change, and become a sage expert only after he had condensed over 1,000 Tao principles. It wasn't very difficult to condense principles at this stage. The most important point was that the body must be capable of containing them. People with formidable bodies like that of Yi Shiwen would obviously reap great benefits for cheap. Only the experts of the intermediate stage of semi-sage realm were capable of condensing 300 Tao principles. However, Yi Shiwen had managed to pull it off nonetheless. He couldn't be taken lightly. In fact, he could instantly go past the 300 mark, so long as his body could become stronger. However, The danger related to this Zhu Tianzong matter had gone far beyond Yi Zaiwen's imagination. "Shi Jiming, come out!" Suddenly, a loud shout came from outside. Yi Shiwen had been seated calmly inside the cave mansion and had been waiting for any news related to Zhu Tianzong. Yi Shiwen swept out his divine sense to probe the outside. He saw a 20-year-old man. He was clad in a tiger fur. His bronze-colored skin was glowing wildly. His eyes looked fierce, and it seemed as if he'd bite someone at the drop of a hat. He turned out to be a semi-sage expert. His intrepid aura was sweeping across the surroundings. It carried the presence of principles. 5 or 6 barbarian warriors were stationed behind him. Each of these individuals was an expert of Legendary's great complete realm. Their valiant aura made them seem very frightening. Yi Shiwen came out flying. He looked coldly at this young man. He had come to know this man from Shi Jiming's memory. This young man was named Ding Gaoyang. He was the son of another elder. He and Shi Jiming would often be entangled in small skirmishes. And Shi Jiming had always failed to deal with him. "Ding Gaoyang, what are you doing here?" Yi Zaiwen's countenance was ice-cold as he asked. "Humph. You really wish to die, don't you? You dared to send someone from your faction to look for Brother Zhu's whereabouts. Do you wish to die? Don't you know that Zhu Tianzong's whereabouts are a secret? Yet you're trying to find him?" Ding Gaoyang replied coldly. Then he grabbed a barbarian expert from behind and threw him on the ground. That expert was Shi Jiming's confidant, but he was already dead. Yi Shiwen frowned. Zhu Tianzong's matter was more complex than he had expected. Initially, he had anticipated that he could easily find Zhu Tianzong's whereabouts by taking the advantage of Shi Jiming's position. But one simple investigation attempt had led to such a big development. Brother Zhu Tianzong is in the presence of His Majesty the Cave Lord. He has obtained a special permission to immerse himself in the flaming sun real water, by the virtue of his great achievements. It shall help him to condense principles. Then he would be able to attain the real body of the barbarian god. He will then have boundless future prospects. At that time, he may also become a member of my palace. And you dared to send someone to track him down? Ding Gaoyang sneered. Not many people know that Brother Zhu was our undercover agent in the true martial university, and he has now returned. But you sent your man to track him in spite of knowing this. You are courting death. I suspect that you've secretly collaborated with the true martial university. Just you wait. I will inform the elders. And then you will die. Ding Gaoyang laughed out loud. He had finally gotten the opportunity to get rid of this old enemy of his. He hadn't expected that his arch-rival would be so foolish that he'd try to look for Zhu Tianzong's whereabouts. But now he could get him killed by the hands of the elders. Condensing barbarian god's real body from flaming sun real water. Yi Shiwen instantly found the answer from Shi Jiming's memory. This flaming sun real water was an extraordinary and magical liquid. It was capable of enhancing one's physique to a great extent. Even Shi Jiming had only heard about it. He had never obtained the reward of accessing it. One could only obtain this reward if they were to make a massive contribution to the Fire Cloud Cave. Even then, one could only obtain a small vial of this magical liquid for consumption, but it was enough to enhance one's body significantly. However, Zhu Tianzong had gotten a chance to immerse his entire body in the flaming sun real water pond. How big a contribution towards the Fire Cloud Cave could get one such a reward? The practice method of the barbarian people was a bit similar to Yi Zaiwen's. Both aimed to infinitely strengthen their bodies. Yi Zaiwen's main objective was to practice the gilded tyrant form to the pinnacle. The barbarian people's main objective was to condense the real body of the barbarian god. However, the gilded tyrant form was different. The gilded tyrant form was achieved by strengthening the body to an extremely profound level. However, the real body of the barbarian god was itself a type of body, and was similar to the physique of the barbarian god. As mentioned in the legends, the southern barbarians practiced martial arts largely to transform their own body into the real body of the barbarian god. But this process was very long. A majority of the barbarian people would give up midway since they couldn't attain the real body of the barbarian god. But immersing oneself in the flaming sun real water could quicken this process. However, One needed to consume a great amount of the flaming sun real water to attain the real body of barbarian god. And one could only get a small vial of this magical liquid even after they had made a massive contribution to the fire cloud cave, since they couldn't allow their disciples to squander this precious treasure. Their willingness to give such a reward to Zhu Tianzong after his return from the true martial university clearly showed that he must brought back some extraordinary intel. Now that you've come here, I won't let you leave. Yi Shiwen sneered. Ding Gaoyang had brought about his own destruction. Yi Shiwen was disguised as Shi Ming. But the higher authorities would make an investigation if they came to know about this matter. Then, how would Yi Shiwen be able to conceal the truth? Are you implying that you'll silence the witnesses? All by yourself? Ding Gaoyang looked disdainfully at Yi Shiwen and said. He knew this old rival very well. Both youngsters were on par with each other. Therefore one couldn't do much about the other. Humph! Yi Shiwen sneered. The sound waves suddenly scattered and set off waves of energy. The energy waves swept out in the surroundings and shattered the space wherever they went. Those experts of Legendary's great complete realm who had accompanied Ding Gaoyang were struck. They spouted blood as the bones throughout their bodies got crushed. Their energy centers were severed. You have brought about your own doom. Do you think that you've obtained a rare opportunity to make some meritorious achievement? Yi Shiwen walked towards Ding Gaoyang, step by step. His imposing aura also increased, bit by bit. How can it be possible? How did you become so strong? Ding Gaoyang's pupil suddenly contracted. An expression of terror appeared on his face. He finally realized that his old enemy had become extremely powerful. In fact, he had effortlessly killed those experts of Legendary's great complete realm with the sound energy produced from just a humph. They knew each other very well. So Ding Gaoyang was aware that it was impossible for Shi Ming to achieve such a feat, but he didn't know what kind of a fortuitous adventure Shi Ming had come across that had made him so terrifying. Go and ask the King of Hell. Yi Shiwen sneered. The fire cloud's sky-falling hand appeared to grab Ding Gaoyang. It was strong enough to overturn a mountain. How's this even possible? I can't believe this. Ding Gaoyang roared. He shot the same fire cloud's sky-falling hand towards Yi Shiwen. However, how could he be Yi Ziwen's opponent? His fire cloud's sky-falling hand was grabbed and exterminated by Yi Shiwen. He crushed it into small pieces, and then absorbed it. Then Yi Ziwen's attack advanced forward. Bang! 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 Yi Ziwen's suppression exploded the defense-type magical weapons which had been protecting Ding Gaoyang's body. His protective layer of real elemental energy was also crushed by the suppression. Then the fire cloud's sky-falling hand struck his body. Bang! Yi Ziwen's fire cloud's sky-falling hand grabbed him and crushed his body. His body burst into a group of blood fog. Then Yi Shiwen absorbed his soul and read his memory. Yi Shiwen came to know that he hadn't yet reported this matter to the higher authority. He wanted to humiliate his old enemy before he reported this matter to the higher authority. Yi Shiwen felt a bit relieved. Disguising as Shi Ming had turned out to be a good deal. Now finding Zhu Tianzong's whereabouts wouldn't be a big deal for him. After all, he was the son of an elder, and also a semi-sage expert. But he didn't want an inspection to happen since his identity could be revealed if they were to investigate. Ding Gaoyang's memories revealed that Zhu Tianzong had already left for the Flaming Sun Real Pond. The pond was located in the depths of the Fire Cloud Cave. So he must rush there to kill Zhu Tianzong. It would be more difficult to deal with him once he had attained the real body of the barbarian god. Yi Shiwen was about to leave. But suddenly, the sky began to shake violently. It unexpectedly began to collapse into small pieces, bit by bit. Chapter 390. Batum 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 Batum. Suddenly, the sounds of the drum beats reverberated between the heaven and earth. Yi Shiwen came to know the meaning of this signal from the memories of the deceased disciples of Fire Cloud Cave. It was the Fire Cloud's cave signal to gather their experts in a time of crisis. This signal was only used in extremely urgent and critical situations. Crap! What is going on? Yi Emo looked towards the huge cracks that had started to appear in the sky and asked. Yi Shiwen had just flown out of this mountain range when a large number of experts flew past him. Move fast. Damn it. This can't be happening. How is this possible? Those bastards of the devil worship cult joined hands with the experts of the 100 Barbarians Cave. Aren't the experts of 100 Barbarians Cave afraid of facing the outrage and public indignation from the people of the true martial world? An expert bellowed. Damn it. They've already advanced towards the main altar. They must found out that a lot of our experts aren't present here, and have already left for the battlefront. Shit. They've certainly established a direct connection with the devil world. A group of formidable figures swept across from the sky. Experts of semi-sage realm, sage realm, and even unfathomable experts of great sage realm were present in the group. Each of these experts went flying away. Their tyrannical auras swept across in the surroundings. The tyrannical devil energy was also spread in all directions at the same time. Damn. The 100 Barbarian Cave was doing nothing but attracting our experts to the battlefront earlier. But they wanted to launch their main attack from behind in reality. Yi Shiwen was also quite shocked by this. The Fire Cloud Cave was one of the superpowers that had stood erect in the true martial world for thousands of years. How was a major force like this just seeing its people massacred before its eyes? This was really a messed up situation. Every Sage Realm and Great Sage Realm expert of the Fire Cloud Cave immediately came outside. A startling conflict broke out between them and the joint forces of the 100 Barbarians Cave and Devil Worship Cult. Yi Shiwen, this is a very good opportunity. A majority of the experts of the Fire Cloud Cave have gone out to fight. Now, it's the best chance to obtain Flaming Sun Real Water. Yi Mo shouted with excitement. The Flaming Sun Real Water is quite amazing. A treasure like that doesn't appear often, maybe once in countless years. Even a major force like the Fire Cloud Cave deems it as a priceless treasure. Your Gilded Tyrant form can have a breakthrough to the 6th layer if you can immerse your body in Flaming Sun Real Water. You will become invincible among the experts who are at the initial stage of Semi-Sage Realm. Ahaha. One's body could obtain incredible benefits with the help of the nourishment from Flaming Sun Real Water. That was why it was considered the most precious reward by the people of Fire Cloud Cave. Moreover, you can take advantage of this chaos and kill Zhu Tianzong. Then you can get out of Fire Cloud Cave once the mission is complete. Staying here is extremely dangerous. Yi Mo said. Yi Shiwen nodded. The fight between all the sage experts and great sage experts of Fire Cloud Cave and the joint forces of 100 Barbarians Cave and Devil Worship Cult was world-shaking. The space surrounding the Fire Cloud Cave had also started to collapse and shatter into small pieces. No one had expected that such a terrifying battle would break out. One mustn't forget that the Fire Cloud Cave was a colossus force just like the true martial university. They knew how to protect their lair. They had locked the surrounding space and had made it impossible to open a direct portal to the devil world. Moreover, they had locked the space so tightly that the experts of below Semi-Sage Realm couldn't break it. They could at most cause a minor damage in a radius of a few meters. The damaged part of the barrier would then restore itself immediately. However, even such an insanely strong spatial barrier had been smashed into pieces. Nobody had witnessed such a horrifying battle before. To the extent that its aftermath could scare a person to death. This kind of battle appeared like a mortal fight among immortals, even to someone like Yi Shiwen. His Gilded Tyrant form had been mastered to the 5th layer, but even that could disintegrate by a mere touch from the complementary waves that were being generated during this battle. Yi Shiwen certainly wasn't interested in taking part in this battle. Devil Worship Cult's name, as well as its existence, had annoyed the true martial world since the beginning. They were usually the reason behind any major chaos. A majority of devil experts of the Devil Worship Cult had spread everywhere like forest fire. Their main motive was to create chaos in the true martial world. And for that purpose they could form alliance with anyone. The more chaos they could create, the more beneficial it would be for them. That was because it would create the opportunity to establish the dominance of the devil world over the true martial world. Yi Shiwen decided to first kill Zhu Tianzong, without worrying about anything else. And then, had plundered the Flaming Sun Real Water. Yi Shiwen was very powerful. He could be considered at the peak of the initial stage of semi-sage realm, but his gilded tyrant form could smoothly reach the 6th layer if he could get his hands on the flaming sun real water. Consequently, his fighting strength would increase by leaps and bounds. A difference of heaven and earth would come into effect by this 1 layer's increment. Yi Shiwen restrained his breath and quickly flew towards the flaming sun temple. The flaming sun real water was genuinely the most precious divine liquid of the fire cloud cave. It was stored inside the flaming sun temple, which was situated in the depths of fire cloud cave. Yi Shiwen was disguised as Shi Ming, but he still couldn't approach it that easily even if he used his identity as an elder son. But the entire fire cloud cave was in chaos right now. They had been at war with the 100 barbarians cave for so many years, but today's battle was unusual. There were often short skirmishes between them. Yet, they never went as far as to attack each other's nests since that could pose a threat to their entire existence. The entire fire cloud cave was in mess. This was quite a heart-curdling spectacle. Yi Shiwen approached the flaming sun temple gradually. At this time, the fire cloud cave no longer looked like the wonderland it used to be. It no longer had the immortal aura lingering in the air. Instead, the atmosphere was loaded with various kinds of vicious energy, ominous aura and devil energy. The spectacle seemed like something that would appear on Doomsday. Various kinds of roars and shrieks of devil experts could be heard. It seemed as if the barrier between this world and the devil world had been torn open, and a large number of various sorts of devils had barged into this world. Many disciples of Fire Cloud Cave were fighting with the devil experts. It seemed as if the entire territory of the Fire Cloud Cave had been encompassed in this tremendous battle. The Fire Cloud Cave wasn't prepared for this sudden enemy attack, in spite of fact that they had used several defense-type matrices. So they had been forced to retreat by the allied forces of their enemies. Little by little, they were being pushed inwards from the peripheral region. Several of their palaces had fallen into conflagration. Great numbers of disciples of the Fire Cloud Cave had been killed or swallowed by the devils. It was an exceptionally tragic spectacle, like a scene from purgatory itself. Yi Shiwen continued to fly towards his destination. On the way, he saw a large group of devils not far from him. Their strange laughter was proliferating everywhere and sounded extremely scary. In fact, some of the experts of the 100 barbarians cave and devils had even made their way inside the main altar. There was no way to stop them because of their massive numerical strength. These experts were on a killing spree inside the altar. Yi Shiwen also came across some of these experts on his way. He didn't hold back and killed these evildoers. Yi Shiwen didn't hold a good opinion of the devils anyway. He had been fighting against the devil race for a long time. Soon, Yi Shiwen arrived at the Flaming Sun Temple. This place was also somewhat chaotic, but not as worse as outside. At this time, a few disciples of Semi-Sage Realm arrived there. One of them shouted, "Stop! Who are you? This is an important place of the Fire Cloud Cave. No one is allowed to come here without the Cave Lord's permission." Yi Shiwen didn't act politely. He shot the fire cloud sky falling hand and grabbed them all at once. Bang! 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 These semi-sage experts were no match for Yi Shiwen and were insta-killed. They hadn't anticipated that one of their own would arrive here and attack them in this manner. They had arrived here to protect the Flaming Sun Temple. They were naturally elites among elites. An ordinary expert of semi-sage realm shouldn't have been their opponent. Even Shi Ming might not have been their match. However, it was such a pity that they had come across Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen entered the temple without any hesitation. He saw a spacious and empty hall as soon as he went inside the temple. In the hall, he saw a pond whose perimeter was less than 100 meters. A red-colored liquid was boiling inside the pond. He sensed some kind of tyrannical energy seething inside the liquid. This was what Yi Shiwen was seeking for, the Flaming Sun real water. The Fire Cloud Cave had been accumulating this Flaming Sun real water since times immemorial. It was very hard to accumulate so much. One could accumulate only a bit of this magical liquid. And that too after saving up for countless years. Yi Shiwen dived into the Flaming Sun real water. He felt incredible once he was in the water. The pores in his skin and the capillaries in his body immediately started to open up. He went all out and started to absorb the flaming sun real water. This flaming sun real water possessed a strong concentration of the positive yang energy. This energy had been accumulated in abundance for countless years to form the flaming sun real water. Hence, it possessed endless power. Yi Shiwen felt the influx of a majestic power emerge inside his body as he absorbed the flaming sun real water. It was intensely hot. It burned his meridians as it circulated through them. The trace of a painful expression appeared on Yi Zaiwen's face. An ordinary attack couldn't injure his body, thanks to his gilded tyrant form. Even his meridians were extremely strong. An ordinary energy shouldn't have been able to harm them. However, he felt as if his meridians were going to explode. But he didn't dare to stop the absorption midway, and began to operate his gilded tyrant form in order to completely absorb this power. This power was different from the energies that Yi Shiwen had absorbed in the past. It had started to transform the structure of his body after it had drilling into it. Even his gilded tyrant form had begun to transform in some unknown direction. Yi Shiwen certainly knew that his body was soon going to transform into the real body of the barbarian god, if he didn't do anything. He wouldn't have minded if he were a barbarian. Rather, a barbarian would have been extremely happy if that had happened. However, he was dead set on practicing his own version of body tempering technique. Therefore, he couldn't allow his body to transform into the real body of the barbarian god. He could only restrain the decomposition of flaming sun real water inside his body and redirect it towards the nourishment of the sixth layer of tyrant body technique. Golden divine beams began to flicker frantically inside Yi Zaiwen's body. He began to operate his tyrant body technique at its best since he wanted it to have a breakthrough to the sixth layer. Bang! It was hard to tell after how long, but a terrifying aura broke out of his body. The tyrant body technique had finally been practiced to the sixth layer. Chapter 391. Yi Shiwen had finished absorbing the flaming sun real water, and his gilded tyrant form had finally made the breakthrough to the sixth layer. His whole body was glittering and emitting golden rays of light. Red drops of water were gradually dripping from his golden body. Yi Shiwen had felt as if his body was about to be torn apart once he started to absorb the flaming sun real water. He could feel his body transforming on a cellular level. He could feel his cells being torn open and then reconstructed. Yi Shiwen had suppressed the transformation of his body. After that, he had focused all the accumulated energy into reaching the sixth layer of gilded tyrant form. He had consumed only 1/10 of the flaming sun real water from the pond during this breakthrough. No wonder it was considered Fire Cloud Cave's most hidden and precious treasure. The big pond was full of flaming sun real water, but everyone wasn't allowed to use it. In fact, only 1 or 2 experts from a generation were allowed to use it to attain the real body of the barbarian god. Only a few people had the authority to use this magical liquid. But the entire flaming sun real water had fallen into Yi Zaiwen's hands. It could be said that this was his biggest harvest on this mission. Now he wouldn't have to face difficulties in having future breakthroughs, thanks to this flaming sun real water. Ha ha ha, Yi Shiwen, you've developed quite a lot. And the flaming sun real water has fallen into your hands. So you won't have to face difficulties in perfecting the gilded tyrant form. Yi Mo laughed out loud. He couldn't have obtained this opportunity if it hadn't been for the sudden outbreak of this battle and chaos that had ensued thereafter. In fact, he wouldn't have even thought about this impossible task. Who are you? A man's loud shout was heard. It came from outside the temple. He wasn't clad in the common barbarian attire. He was dressed up as a mediator of the southern region. He was clad in white clothes. He had thick eyebrows and big eyes. He looked different from other barbarians. Yi Shiwen immediately recognized that person. He turned out to be his target, Zhu Tianzong. Yi Shiwen stepped out from the flaming sun real pond. He laughed mischievously. Then he looked at Zhu Tianzong and said, I am Yi Shiwen. Nice to meet you, Brother Zhu. Yi Shiwen collected the remaining flaming sun real water from the pond as he said that. Zhu Tianzong's complexion suddenly changed. He said, You're Yi Shiwen? Zhu Tianzong had obviously heard Yi Zaiwen's name. After all, Yi Shiwen was very famous among this session's disciples. Zhu Tianzong had never seen him before, but he could tell that this guy was indeed Yi Shiwen. It's impossible. I know everything about the people the true martial university has sent after me. And I know for sure that you're not one of them. Zhu Tianzong's complexion looked ugly as he said that. Yi Shiwen realized that the merit elder had indeed been right. Zhu Tianzong had genuinely established a big information network during the many years he had spent in the Merit Palace Hall. Those people were sent only to attract Big Brother Zhu's attention. Yi Shiwen spoke with a light smile on his face. It is I who will take your head. You want to kill me? You're very reckless. Zhu Tianzong sneered and said, I know that you're a Heaven's Pride level expert. But, you've brought about your own destruction by coming here. Haha. Today I get to personally strangle a Heaven's Pride level expert. Zhu Tianzong burst into laughter. Then his eyes turned fierce and revealed a somewhat cruel look. Zhu Tianzong sneered. His hands emitted majestic golden lights. This was his secret technique, Golden Cicada Sage Beheader. He appeared like the incarnation of a giant cicada god from ancient times. He streaked across the horizon as he flew forward. There were Tao principles wrapped around his body. He was an expert of the semi-sage realm. Yi Ziwen's complexion remained unchanged. He knew that the Lord of the Fire Cloud Cave must have helped Zhu Tianzong with his practice. That was why his cultivation had increased so sharply within such a short time. The golden divinities began to surge within Yi Ziwen's body. His hair was blown upwards. Yi Shiwen launched his counterattack. He didn't need to keep the disguise of a Fire Cloud Cave disciple in front of Zhu Tianzong. Suddenly, a dragon's roar reverberated. His palm's shadow covered the entire sky like dense rain clouds, and went towards Zhu Tianzong to grab him. Bang! Yi Ziwen's palm shadow ferociously collided with the golden cicada's phantom image. The phantom image of golden cicada was torn to pieces and scattered. Zhu Tianzong's real figure had been hidden behind it. It was revealed once again. Yi Ziwen's figure suddenly rose up in the sky. He brandished his palm and displayed the move Hidden Dragon Rises from the Abyss. Suddenly, a golden dragon rushed towards Zhu Tianzong and struck him on his chest. Yi Ziwen's coiling dragon palm had been practiced to an extremely profound level. Its power had also increased countless times after Yi Shiwen had deduced all its 9 moves. That golden dragon faced upwards and let out a long and loud roar. Suddenly, this entire place seemed like the country of the dragons. Yi Shiwen had integrated everything he ever comprehended in this simple move. This one move could even rip apart the entire world. Zhu Tianzong was caught off guard. Yi Shiwen had already arrived in front of him. Zhu Tianzong had looked down on Yi Shiwen since he himself was a semi-sage expert. However, he had never thought that Yi Shiwen would turn out to be so terrifying. Yi Shiwen possessed the fighting strength of semi-sage realm. The might displayed by his move was on the level of semi-sage realm. Zhu Tianzong's golden cicada had been ripped apart in a flash. However, Zhu Tianzong wasn't an ordinary character either. He wouldn't have been sent undercover to the true martial university for so many years if he were an ordinary person. Great heaven catching cover. Zhu Tianzong had learnt famous martial arts in the true martial university. His entire body was enveloped in a massive cover of iron. This cover shielded his body. There were no chinks in his cover. In fact, it seemed as if he had practiced this technique to the peak level. The same martial art could display different might in the hands of different people. And the great heaven-catching cover had unleashed superb might when wielded by Zhu Tianzong. Some experts were able to fight a dozen experts of their level at once, even with their own strength suppressed. This entirely depended on the degree of one's understanding of martial arts. It depended on whether one's understanding was profound or not. Perhaps an ordinary expert of Legendary's great complete realm wouldn't be able to budge Zhu Tianzong's great heaven-catching cover. However, he had bumped into Yi Shiwen. Yi Ziwen's innate talent might not be considered as top-notch. Yet he was second to none in the younger generation, especially when it came to one's degree of understanding of martial arts and Tao principles. Bang! The golden dragon opened its strong claws and grabbed Zhu Tianzong's iron cover. Suddenly, it seemed as if the world had lost its color. A loud sound of the collision of gold and iron resounded. The dragon's claws smashed the iron cover into pieces. After that, the golden dragon rushed towards Zhu Tianzong to grab him. Bang! The dragon's claws struck Zhu Tianzong. His body was sent flying upside down by the huge force. Bits of his flesh and blood splattered in all directions. Zhu Tianzong's body got knocked against a pillar inside the main hall, and finally came to a halt. Zhu Tianzong had been nearly struck to death by Yi Ziwen's attack. There was a look of utter shock in his eyes. Yi Shiwen had become so terrifying that even a top individual who had especially been nurtured by the cave lord wasn't worthy of being his opponent. The divine power unleashed by his palm attack was enough to overwhelm the heaven. Zhu Tianzong's complexion turned pale. He had anticipated that he'd be able to run amok in the young generation, once he had stepped into the semi-sage realm, and had attained the real body of the barbarian god. However, he had never imagined that he'd come across a freak like Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen, you must know that you won't be able to get out of the fire cloud cave if you kill me. Zhu Tianzong spoke coldly as he clenched his teeth. His vitality had begun to gradually restore itself. His face had turned bright red. He was clearly using some type of healing technique to speed up the healing process of his injuries. But this healing technique was far inferior to the Phoenix regeneration technique. Yi Ziwen's Phoenix regeneration technique healed very quickly at the very least. In fact, it was so fast that its speed couldn't be tracked by an average person. Yi Shiwen didn't seem to care about Zhu Tianzong's unusual threat. So he walked towards him step by step. Die! Zhu Tianzong roared loudly. His entire body transformed into a giant golden cicada, and rushed towards Yi Shiwen to kill him. It was rumored that this huge golden cicada had once slaughtered a devil god in the ancient times. Yi Shiwen transformed into a golden streamer of light, and rushed towards Zhu Tianzong. A fight broke out between the two. Bang! Their attacks were extremely terrifying and quick. The golden cicada and the golden dragon collided ferociously, and began to strangle each other to death. Their collisions unleashed a burst of endless divine beams. These beams spread out and cracked the surrounding space into small pieces. The temple was made up of some unknown yet hard stone. But it couldn't withstand the impact of such horrifying attacks, and collapsed into pieces. The flaming sun real water was a precious treasure of the fire cloud cave. So the sudden collapse of the flaming sun temple immediately attracted the attention of several powerhouses. Yi Shiwen, you can't delay any further. The experts of the fire cloud cave will rush over any time now. Yi Mo hastily reminded Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen nodded. He could feel several divine senses probe this place. He knew that several experts would arrive soon. So he couldn't drag this fight any longer, otherwise, he'd die for sure. Ha ha ha, Yi Shiwen, you'll die today. Zhu Tianzong had understood what was going to happen. So he had started to laugh out loud. His countenance also turned somewhat hideous. Yi Shiwen would be done for. As long as he could last until the arrival of the other experts. Yi Shiwen sneered. Zhu Tianzong's plan was good. But did he have the ability to compel Yi Shiwen into dragging this fight? Yi Shiwen brandished his palm. This palm attack was invoked with the roar of a dragon. A golden dragon appeared, and tore the space into small pieces. Yi Shiwen didn't plan to delay any further. So, he had integrated the entirety of his martial power into this one palm attack. He had basically turned it into a peerless attack. Bang! Zhu Tianzong's golden cicada was defeated once again. Then the palm attack went forward and fiercely crashed into Zhu Tianzong's body. Puff! Zhu Tianzong spouted a mouthful of blood. His chest caved inwards. He had used his hands to resist this palm attack. However, his hands had been broken in the process. Air started to leak out of his punctured chest as he suffocated to death. Yi Shiwen didn't hesitate. He immediately collected Zhu Tianzong's corpse. Then he turned into a streamer of light and disappeared beyond the horizon. Chapter 392. Returns to the true martial university. The blue sky appeared clean for thousands of miles. There were no clouds, no wind. A figure was approaching swiftly from far away. He was anxiously rushing over from a distance. But the speed of that figure made it was very difficult to see it with naked eyes. His lustrous body emitted golden light. He was over 20 years old. He was clad in ragged clothes. Blood dripped from his body. He was clearly in a very difficult situation. A pair of golden wings was crazily flapping behind his body. "Boy, you can't get away. I will dismember your body into 1,000 pieces, just to vent my anger." A loud rumbling sound came from behind. It sounded like a thunderclap. This person was over 10 feet tall. He was an incomparably sturdy and old barbarian. He held a bone club in his hand. He was pursuing closely, and getting closer and closer by taking large strides. A terrifying power was wrapped around his burly body. One could clearly see that he was a terrifying expert of the great sage realm. Yi Shiwen cursed his misfortune. He had escaped after he had killed Zhu Tianzong. But he didn't expect to find a great sage expert chasing after him just when he had come halfway to the true martial university. He would have long been caught if he weren't Yi Shiwen. Moreover, the devil wings was the world's top-notch agility technique. Without it, Yi Shiwen would have been caught and slaughtered by now. However, even then, Yi Shiwen had occasionally sustained the old man's attacks. An average person would have died if they had sustained such injuries. But his phoenix regeneration technique was operating frantically to repair the wounds. Otherwise, he would have died a long time ago. The collapse of the Flaming Sun Temple had caught this old barbarian's attention. He had become furious, and had rushed towards Yi Shiwen after finding out that the Flaming Sun real water had been stolen. Yi Shiwen believed that a group of great sage experts of the Fire Cloud Cave would have come looking for him if they weren't being hindered by the allied forces of the 100 Barbarians Cave and the Devil Worship cult. The old man's agility technique wasn't as profound as that of Yi Ziwen's. However, his martial power and cultivation were far more profound than Yi Ziwen's. He was constantly speeding up as he closely pursued Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen cursed. He would get caught soon if the things were to continue like this. At this moment, he faintly saw the true martial university up ahead. However, he was completely exhausted. He felt tired even though he was being supported by his gilded tyrant form. His real elemental energy had been consumed way back. So he had consumed an incredible amount of Spirit Dawn in order to maintain his current speed. The Spirit Dawn and the primary Spirit Dawn were frantically burning inside the heavenly source mirror to supplement some energy to his body. The automatic regeneration of real elemental energy would have been of no help. After all, the Devil Wings was an outstanding agility technique of the Devil Kings. Only he had been capable of using the Devil Wings to travel back and forth across the world. He could travel thousands of miles in the blink of an eye. That old barbarian became anxious when he saw the true martial university getting closer and closer. He brandished his bone club. The bone club rose against the wind and went straight towards Yi Shiwen. It got bigger and bigger in size. Now, it appeared like a dragon bone as it advanced towards Yi Shiwen to tear him apart. Yi Shiwen accelerated. The devil wings started to flap behind him, non-stop. The intense howls of departed souls sounded from that bone club just when it was about to pound upon Yi Shiwen. The howls were the sounds of the people who had been killed by this bone club. The space in its path got shattered. It gave birth to an extremely horrifying scene. A loud shout originated from the true martial university at that critical moment. Who dares to be presumptuous in our true martial university? The void was torn open, and a big hand swept down from inside the crack. And it grabbed that massive bone club. Bang! The terrifying collision swept out terrible energy storms. Layer upon layer of storm was swept out, like the waves of the sea. They shattered the space, and caused the chaos to leak out from the other side. Yi Shiwen suddenly felt a terrifying aftermath hitting his body. His bones got crushed. However, he didn't dare to stop. He flew swiftly, and broke into the territory of the true martial university. That old barbarian looked bitterly towards Yi Shiwen as he saw him enter the territory of the true martial university. He couldn't do anything. He wouldn't dare to enter the territory. He would die miserably if he dared to enter this territory. In spite of the fact that he was an expert of great sage realm, he bitterly turned around and left. Yi Shiwen heaved a sigh of relief as he saw that old barbarian depart. He looked up and saw Ing City up ahead. The person who had saved him turned out to be the Old City Lord of Ing City. Yi Shiwen was grateful to the Old City Lord for saving his life. He was in a very critical situation prior to his entry into the true Martial University's territory. He relaxed only after he had entered the city. What have you done to make a great sage expert pursue you for 10,000s of miles from the fire cloud cave? The teasing voice of an old man came from the void. An old man clad in black clothes slowly walked towards Yi Shiwen. He had wrinkles on his face. He appeared to be taking short steps, but his speed was very fast. He arrived in front of Yi Shiwen within a moment. Greetings, City Lord. Yi Shiwen cupped his hands in obeisance and greeted. He grimaced in pain because of the wounds on his body. You still need to heal. The Old City Lord said. Why did he chase you here, all the way from the fire cloud cave? Yi Shiwen smiled mischievously and replied in somewhat embarrassed manner. I stole their flaming sun real water. Yi Shiwen felt that he had met with an elder of his own family. Such was the Old City Lord's impression on his psyche. In fact, Yi Shiwen felt as if he had bathed in the spring breeze. The true Martial University was very big. Several people found him unpleasing to the eye, and often tried to eradicate him. Only a few people treated him nicely. Yi Shiwen thought that he should tell the truth. It would have been okay to conceal it if nobody had found out, since they wouldn't have found any evidence that he was the one behind the missing flaming sun real water. However, they had already found out about it. And he had also been chased down. This matter couldn't remain hidden for long. People would come to know about it, sooner or later. However, he didn't care much. He wasn't worried about the higher authorities. The flaming sun real water was undoubtedly extremely precious. But only for the Southern Wastelands forces. They could use the flaming sun real water to cultivate the real body of the barbarian god. In fact, they could use it to create a generation of disciples who could become the future pillars. No wonder it was extremely precious. Only the most outstanding geniuses, or the person with maximum contribution to their sect, could obtain this reward. But it could only be used as nourishment for practicing the tyrant body technique for an outsider like Yi Shiwen. That's because only a few forces of the Southern Wasteland knew how to use the secret technique of flaming sun real water. This hadn't been revealed to the outsiders. Moreover, the higher authorities would never plunder the treasures of the disciples. After all, these disciples would have to be entirely dependent on the true Martial University for their cultivation, if they didn't come across such fortuitous encounters. And that would be simply far insufficient for their progress. It could be said that the people in the higher authorities wouldn't have made it to the top if they hadn't come across such fortuitous encounters in their young age. Moreover, it would ruin the reputation of the true Martial University if the higher-ups were to start extorting the disciples. Therefore, Yi Shiwen scrapped the idea of using this as a hidden trump. Ha 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 ha! The Old City Lord burst into laughter after he listened to Yi Shiwen's reply. He spoke in a carefree manner. Good, well done. You've done a good job. The relation between the true Martial University and other forces wasn't very good. The 100 Barbarians Cave, Fire Cloud Cave, Eagle Cave, and several other forces of the Southern Wasteland had consistently tried to invade the southern region. One couldn't tell how many times they had attacked the true Martial University. They were considered as the arch-rivals of the true Martial University. I must say that you're very courageous. The Old City Lord looked at Yi Shiwen and said. He shook his head and continued to laugh. Yi Shiwen's injuries had been repaired over the course of their conversation. He was nearly back to normal. The Old City Lord's complexion suddenly turned solemn after Yi Shiwen told him about the devil worship cult and the 100 Barbarians Cave's joint attack against the Fire Cloud Cave. These Colossus forces held incredible influence in the true martial world. The consequences would be inconceivable if the Fire Cloud Cave had genuinely been attacked by the allied forces of the devil worship cult and the 100 Barbarians Cave. This would have been a trivial matter if the 100 Barbarians Cave had attacked alone. However, they had persuaded the devil worship cult for help. The 100 Barbarians Cave must have offered great benefits to them in return. However, thanks to that, the devil worship cult would seize this opportunity to expand its influence. This wasn't good. In fact, it was very bad. The old city lord didn't stay for long. He hurriedly left after he listened to Yi Ziwen's words. Yi Shiwen didn't mind. He advanced towards the Merit Palace Hall to submit the finished mission of Zhu Tianzong's assassination. He had thoroughly completed this mission. Countless disciples began to talk among themselves as soon as Yi Shiwen entered the Merit Palace Hall. Yi Shiwen has arrived. Oh my god, this is going to be a startling clash. Didn't you say that Yi Shiwen was afraid and wouldn't arrive? But he's already here. Perhaps the fight will break out shortly. Yi Ziwen's arrival had set off an uproar. We can see a battle of life or death between two Heaven's Pride-level experts. One doesn't get such an opportunity very often. I don't think that Yi Shiwen will agree to participate in this mortal combat. The opponent possesses Titan body. His body is incredibly strong. Yi Shiwen was somewhat baffled. What life or death battle? However, he wasn't interested in pondering over this matter. First, he wanted to submit the completed mission. Yi Shiwen went into the depths of Merit Palace Hall. The Merit Elder had already obtained the news of his arrival, and was waiting for him. He smiled as he saw Yi Shiwen carrying a person's head. He said, "We weren't wrong about you." He examined Zhu Tianzong's head, and was amazed to realize that Zhu Tianzong had already reached the semi-sage realm at the time of his death. However, Yi Shiwen had still managed to kill him. A whole new level of respect emerged inside his heart for Yi Shiwen. Anyway, our Merit Palace Hall owes you a big favor for this mission. The Merit Elder spoke. Elder is being modest. Yi Shiwen smiled and said, "However, you seem to be in a lot of trouble now. You may not know this, but that Titan guy is looking for you." The Merit Elder looked at Yi Shiwen and said, "Our Merit Palace Hall can step in to settle this dispute if you don't wish to come forward." Chapter 393. Our Merit Palace Hall can step in to settle this dispute if you don't want to come forward. The Merit Elder looked at Yi Shiwen and said. Yi Shiwen came to know from the Merit Elder that a storm had been set off in the True Martial University during his absence. Someone in the younger generation had stood up and claimed that they had broken through to the semi-sage realm. It had caused a sensation inside the university. That person was none other than the guy with the Titan body. He was regarded as a top-notch Heaven's Pride-level expert in the younger generation. However, it didn't limit to this only. The Titan guy had issued a declaration of battle to Yi Shiwen right after he made the announcement that he had entered the semi-sage realm. Moreover, it wasn't an ordinary declaration of battle. It was for a mortal combat, an intense battle of life or death. This declaration of battle caused a huge sensation. Everyone was in uproar. Such battle only took place between two mortal enemies. This was going to be a mortal combat, and would only end with the death of any one of the two contenders. It was clear that the guy with the Titan body held deep hatred towards Yi Shiwen to have desired such a deadly confrontation. Thanks to Yi Ziwen's previous battles, it was too obvious to everyone that he possessed a gilded body. In fact, he was also known as the Golden War God. Yi Shiwen and that Titan guy were well known for their incredibly strong bodies among this session's Heaven's Pride-level experts. It was said that the experts with the Titan's body possessed the bloodline of the Titan race. That's why he had such an intrepid body. The Titan race used to be a famous godly race at one point of time. Yi Ziwen's title of Golden War God was fierce, and it had spread far and wide. After all, he had repeatedly used his extremely strong body to kill his opponents. Many people were thinking, who among these two individuals possessed a more intrepid body? It was already determined that the Titan guy possessed Titan's blood. But nobody knew anything about Yi Ziwen's physique. They didn't know whose bloodline Yi Shiwen possessed. And they didn't know why it was so tough. It was needless to say that they were unaware that Yi Ziwen's physique wasn't derived from his bloodline. Its toughness was derived from the practice of a technique called Gilded Tyrant Form. Everyone was excited. They were looking forward to it. This was the first collision between two Heaven's Pride-level experts of this session, since they had been named. Undoubtedly, this was the most anticipated battle in the eyes of many people. And most importantly, the Titan guy had challenged Yi Shiwen to a mortal combat. They would have no choice but to go all out to kill each other in this battle of life or death. It was evident that one of these two experts would choose death over defeat. So the fight was going to be intense, without a doubt. Countless people were looking forward to this fight, and many of them were discussing about it. After all, the martial arts competition among the four forces was right around the corner. The general conduct should have been to keep these geniuses out of the harm's way since they were bound to become main contenders in the upcoming competition, let alone allowing them kill each other in a mortal combat. Most people believed that the Titan guy was extremely overbearing. Then, what was the need for such a battle? Was it in order to obtain the title of strongest body? Is it the beginning of the conquest to become the strongest in the younger generation? Does nobody in the higher authorities care about it? Shouldn't someone stop this fight? Many people were discussing about this matter. Some were excited to see the battle between two Heaven's Pride level experts. Some didn't wish to see the fighting strength of the true martial university decline by losing a Heaven's Pride level expert. This wasn't an ordinary fight. Victory and defeat wouldn't decide the result. A mortal combat ended very differently. No matter who would win or lose, the fight wouldn't stop until the losing contender had been killed. In other words, one individual, whether Yi Shiwen or the Titan guy, was going to die. The death of an ordinary person was nothing. But it would be a massive loss if one among these two experts would die, since it would be tantamount to the death of a possible future great sage expert. Some people had opposed this matter. But some people had also endorsed it. In fact, many people had even added fuel to the fire from the shadows. Some people even hoped for Yi Shiwen and the Titan guy to mutually eradicate each other. There were several people who were somewhat worried. After all, these two experts could become the true martial university's backbone in the future. So they only wanted these two Heaven's Pride level experts to indulge in an ordinary match to decide a victor, and satisfy their curiosity with that much alone. They didn't wish to see a mortal battle. Many senior experts from previous sessions were also excited to see the match between this session's new disciples. Doesn't the higher authority care about this matter? Would they blankly watch the death of a future great sage expert? No way. I've heard that some high-level experts are supporting this fight. The chief of the Clear Sky Peak is going out of his way to support that Titan guy. Otherwise, how could this fight have been approved in the first place? Neither of those two experts can be taken lightly. That Titan expert has become stronger after he entered the true martial university. And thanks to his special Titan physique, he is capable of killing an ordinary expert of the semi-sage realm with just one slap. Yi Shiwen can't be taken lightly either. He has completed many impossible missions in the last 2 years. He even penetrated deep into the lair of the devil worship cult to assassinate his target, and managed to come back alive. But that's useless now. Yi Shiwen hasn't stepped into the semi-sage realm as of yet. But that Titan guy has. And he's impatiently waiting to kill Yi Shiwen. It seems that he harbors a great hatred for Yi Shiwen. What kind of an enmity do these two have in reality? Every outsider had a different opinion. The Merit Elder lightly glanced at Yi Shiwen. The Merit Palace Hall wanted to settle this matter for Yi Shiwen because he had assassinated Zhu Tianzong. And they owed him a big favor for that. So, they wanted to seize this opportunity to return the favor. There's no need for that. I can settle this matter of my own, Yi Shiwen lightly replied. Since that Titan guy wanted a fight, he would give him one. He also wanted to know whether his gilded tyrant form was stronger than the Titan body or not. The Merit Elder looked at Yi Shiwen, but didn't speak further. He had anticipated that Yi Ziwen's fighting strength had only reached the Legendary's Great Complete Realm, or quite possibly the initial stage of the semi-sage realm. But Yi Shiwen was far inferior to that Titan expert, since the latter had likely reached the peak of the initial stage of the semi-sage realm. There was a difference of heaven and earth between the two. However, the Merit Elder felt that he had underestimated Yi Shiwen after he realized that Yi Shiwen had killed Zhu Tianzong, without even being a semi-sage expert himself. Yi Shiwen wasn't as simple as he had anticipated. He could faintly sense that Yi Ziwen's aura carried the principles of the semi-sage realm. This had left him even more shocked. The Merit Palace Hall had initially anticipated that Yi Shiwen wouldn't be able to settle this matter on his own. So, they wanted to help him in getting rid of this problem. On one hand, they wanted to help him because they owed him a big favor. On the other hand, they wanted to establish a good relation with him since he might become a great sage expert in the future. He became somewhat depressed after he heard that Yi Shiwen could settle this dispute on his own. However, Yi Ziwen's statement had made it seem that it would be a direct collision between two outstanding Heaven's Pride-level experts of the younger generation. And a battle to death. The atmosphere was already quite heated, but it had suddenly erupted with Yi Ziwen's return. Many people had thought that Yi Shiwen might be scared, and that's why he had gone into hiding. However, these rumors vanished along with his return. Yi Shiwen wasn't gone because he was afraid. Rather, he was completing a secret mission. Nobody knew about this mission earlier. However, the Merit Palace Hall confirmed it later when they stood out for Yi Shiwen. However, the focus was no longer on whether Yi Shiwen was afraid or not. Now it had shifted to the startling collision which could take place anytime now since Yi Shiwen had finally returned. Yi Shiwen returned to the Hidden Star Peak. The second brother and third sister were still undergoing their closed-door training. The Hidden Star Peak had received incredible benefits by obtaining the complete version of the Hidden Star Scripture. The entire Hidden Star Peak was extremely quiet. But it would be a huge mistake to look down on the current Hidden Star Peak. The Merit Elder also told Yi Shiwen that several Heaven's Pride-level experts had already left for the chaotic Heavenly Foreign Territory to temper their bodies. This chaotic Heavenly Foreign Territory was situated far away in the remote starry sky. There was a lot of chaos there, just as its name suggested. Only the elites could go there. An average person couldn't enter the chaotic heavenly region, not even the experts of Legendary Realm could. Several of the Heaven's Pride-level experts had rushed to the chaotic heavenly region. They believed that they could advance by leaps and bounds within no time after they had tempered their bodies in the chaotic heavenly region. Yi Shiwen was no exception either. However, this upsurge didn't stop after Yi Ziwen's return. Rather, it became more ardent. A disciple of the Clear Sky Peak arrived to meet Yi Shiwen. His eyebrows were as sharp as swords, and his eyes shone like the stars. He was floating in midair, and carried an aloof personality. The god will arrive to kill you half a month from now. Start making the arrangements for your funeral. This disciple had already stepped into the semi-sage realm. He was also a new disciple of this session. But Yi Shiwen and this man weren't the same. This disciple had already reached Legendary's great complete realm when Yi Shiwen and the others had entered the true martial university. He wasn't like the Titan guy or the other top-tier experts. The top-tier experts had chosen to struggle within the half-step Legendary's great complete realm, and would then have a breakthrough to the semi-sage realm. However, this man had switched to the easy cultivation in the Legendary realm, and had then stepped into the semi-sage realm. That was why most people didn't pay much attention to him. The other Heaven's Pride-level experts were merely at half-step Legendary's great complete realm, but they still got more attention and resources than him. Yi Ziwen's eyes flashed as he spotted the emblem of the Army of God at the top of this young man's head. That's right. This disciple had the emblem of the Army of God on his body. This meant that that expert with Titan body was one of the gods. Yi Shiwen had already killed 3 gods out of 5. Therefore, the Titan guy could be either the first god or the second god. Yi Shiwen hadn't heard any news about the Army of God for a long period of time. That's why he had forgotten about them. Yi Shiwen felt strange. The first god and the second god had already arrived inside the true martial university. Why didn't this matter make any noise up till now? It seemed like there were no commotions earlier, because he was waiting until he had stepped into semi-sage realm. He revealed his identity only after he became a semi-sage expert because he could kill Yi Shiwen now. I didn't expect that you'd still be haunting me like a ghost. Yi Shiwen coldly snorted and spoke. Chapter 394. Yi Shiwen, don't you dare act arrogantly before me. You'll be killed by the god this time. No one can save you. The young man looked coldly at Yi Shiwen and said. He was looking down on Yi Shiwen. He would have killed Yi Shiwen right now if the second god hadn't decided to carry out the task personally. The experts under the sage level were like ants. This sentence might seem like a joke. But there was some truth in this ages-old saying. Of course, this young man wasn't yet at the sage realm. However, he was at the semi-sage realm. This meant that he had touched the threshold of the sage realm. As far as he was concerned, there was no difference between ants and a legendary realm expert like Yi Shiwen. And this ant had dared to talk back to him. His complexion had suddenly turned ugly because of this. Someone like you isn't qualified enough to talk to me like this. Yi Shiwen replied indifferently. His complexion turned cold. He wasn't taking this semi-sage expert seriously. Humph. I would have taken your head myself and sent you on your way to the afterlife if the god didn't wish to kill you with his own hands. The young man looked coldly at Yi Shiwen. Don't think that the higher-ups can save your life. They've already agreed to the fight between you and the god. You can't avoid this fight now. Nor can you escape. Hatred flashed in the eyes of that young man. The army of God was well regarded on the ancient road. They were like the kings of the world. However, it had declined because 3 of the gods had been slayed by Yi Shiwen. Several members of the army of God had left afterwards. This had led to their collapse. The god had tempered his body, and had obtained the title of Titan Body. However, that couldn't eliminate the fact that Yi Shiwen had killed 3 gods, and brought about their gradual decline. He felt that Yi Shiwen had earlier disappeared because he wanted to escape from the god's wrath. You members of the army of God really wish to throw away your lives. Yi Shiwen sneered. You're all just a bunch of idiots. Do you wish to die right now? The young man looked coldly at Yi Shiwen. He didn't restrain his killing intention as he continued to stare at Yi Shiwen. He was dying to kill Yi Shiwen on the spot. Do you think you're a god or something? That you can decide who will die and who will not? Unfortunately, this world isn't under your control. Yi Shiwen sneered and spoke. Do you think that you can kill me for him? That's really funny. Yi Shiwen grinned and added. He wouldn't have waited till now if he was confident that he could kill me. The god is invincible. He has an outstanding personality. Killing you will be a piece of cake for him. He wouldn't have tolerated your arrogance for this long if not for the closed-door training that he had to undergo in order to fulfill our peak's requirements. That young man simply disregarded Yi Shiwen's provocative words. Idiot. Yi Shiwen didn't harbor a favorable opinion of people who blindly worship someone. People like this young man couldn't see the truth clearly because of such blind worship. Yi Shiwen stood up. He didn't wish to argue with this man any further. He flew towards the sky. Where do you think you're going? The young man shouted. Chaotic heavenly territory. Yi Shiwen replied lightly. God has challenged you to a fight here. Didn't you hear that? Are you deaf or what? The young man asked loudly. Your god is too full of himself. Yi Shiwen sneered and spoke. Doesn't he realize that the world doesn't revolve around him? He wants to fight with me? Tell him to come to the chaotic heavenly territory. I would gladly make his wish come true if he wants to die so badly. I can see that you're afraid. You've been running since the time the god challenged you. You've just arrived, and now you're trying to escape again. You're a coward. And an incompetent person. That young man retorted sarcastically. Yi Shiwen ignored his barking, and flew straight towards the sky. I will kill you if you bother me again. Yi Shiwen declared with a cold expression on his face. Yi Shiwen didn't mind fighting with that Titan body expert. But he didn't feel like waiting for it to happen. So he suddenly didn't seem interested in the fight. Anyway, that Titan body expert wouldn't let him go that easily. But why was he willing to wait for so long to kill Yi Shiwen? Stop right there. That young man couldn't help but launch an attack as he saw Yi Shiwen running away. His entire body got covered in bursts of fiery red light. They looked like a group of flames as they went straight towards Yi Shiwen. The huge sound of explosion attracted the attention of many surrounding disciples. Yi Shiwen's return had already attracted the attention of many people since they wanted to see how Yi Shiwen would face that Titan guy's challenge. However, he was now engaged in a conflict with that young man. Yi Shiwen didn't say anything. The Han seal smashed down from above. It seemed as if a large mountain had transformed into a giant dragon as it swept down. It also carried traces of the earth attribute principles. They were seething incessantly, and looked exceedingly gorgeous. Bang! A loud explosion resounded as the two parties ferociously collided into each other. That young man's red flames got crushed by Yi Zaiwen's Han seal. His red flames weren't a match for the Han Shan seal, and had been crushed into light particles. The young man frantically retreated upon seeing his attack being defeated in this manner, and he tried his utmost to get out of Yi Zaiwen's Han seal attack's range. However, Yi Shiwen launched another attack, and stretched out his big golden hand to grab him. The big hand appeared just like a golden cloud. It blotted out the sky and covered the earth, and ultimately pounded upon that young man. The young man wanted to escape. However, Yi Zaiwen's big golden hand didn't allow him to. It swept down like an inescapable net. It formed a golden cage as it landed on the earth. It suppressed him with immediate effect. No, that young man screamed. Fire Lotus Brilliant Sun Beheader. The young man stretched out his hand and shouted. A flaming lotus emitted incredibly terrifying rays of light towards Yi Zaiwen's big golden hand. It seemed as if they could burn the entire world. However, that turned out to be useless. Yi Shiwen casually stretched out his big golden hand, and it crushed that flaming lotus. That flaming lotus which could burn the world didn't turn out to be a match for Yi Zaiwen's attack. Yi Zaiwen's big golden hand rolled down, as if to suppress a rebellion. That flaming lotus had been crushed in a flash. Yi Shiwen slapped that young man. He went flying into the sky like a shooting star, and crashed into a mountain. The bones in his body got shattered as a result of the impact, and blood splattered. That young man of semi-sage realm had been defeated quite quickly. In fact, he didn't have the power to fight back. His offensive had been crushed by Yi Shiwen in an instant. Yi Shiwen hadn't even made any major movements. He had merely raised his hand to suppress him. This scene had stunned the onlookers. They had been attracted by the battle between Yi Shiwen and that young man. However, they hadn't anticipated that Yi Shiwen would effortlessly suppress that young man by merely raising his hand. How is this possible? That young man is a semi-sage expert. But he couldn't even take Yi Zaiwen's one move, and was sent flying? Just how terrifying is this Yi Shiwen? Many people were left in shock as they saw this scene. They simply couldn't believe what they had just witnessed. Now I understand why that Titan guy waited for his cultivation to reach the semi-sage realm before he provoked Yi Shiwen. He might become Yi Zaiwen's food if he hadn't cultivated till the semi-sage realm. This battle shouldn't have been so one-sided even if Yi Shiwen were at semi-sage realm. That young man is a semi-sage expert. But he still failed to be Yi Zaiwen's opponent. These Heaven's Pride level experts are extremely frightening. Yi Zaiwen's naming as a Heaven's Pride level expert didn't happen by fluke. Each of these Heaven's Pride level experts has their own trump cards. I had earlier anticipated that Yi Shiwen would get screwed. However, it seems that I was wrong. Yi Shiwen turned out to be so powerful that he casually defeated a semi-sage expert. I'm afraid this Yi Shiwen may turn out to be a headache for that Titan body expert. It seems like the battle between them won't turn out to be boring after all. It will evolve into a fierce struggle between two evenly matched opponents. Yi Shiwen calmly arrived in front of that young man, who had been nailed into the mountain peak. Then he said, 3 days. I'll wait for him for 3 days. I'll leave after that. I'll wipe out your entire army of God if any one of you comes to bother me thereafter. Yi Shiwen wasn't afraid of fighting with that Titan guy. However, he was very annoyed with these flunkies of the army of God. The news about this battle spread out within no time. Many disciples who had been eagerly waiting to watch the fight between Yi Shiwen and the Titan guy were left shell-shocked. Most people hadn't been optimistic about Yi Zaiwen's chances. They figured that he'd die this time because Yi Shiwen hadn't stepped into the semi-sage realm. Unlike his opponent, there was a difference of heaven and earth between a semi-sage expert and a non-semi-sage expert. In fact, most people had figured that Yi Shiwen might not be able to fight back when faced with a powerful expert of the semi-sage realm. Everyone was waiting for the members of Hidden Star Peak to step in to stop this fight. This was supposed to be Mortal Kombat. However, both the experts were like precious treasures for their respective inheritances. There wouldn't have been any problem if this match was only about learning by exchanging pointers. But they were expected to come forward to stop the battle if their disciples' lives were in danger. Moreover, there was a difference of one whole step between Yi Shiwen and the Titan guy's respective levels. Therefore, Yi Shiwen wouldn't lose face even if he were to back down or lose. After all, he wouldn't be losing to an expert of the same realm. Moreover, a short-term failure was simply nothing. After all, they would grow stronger in the future. Possibly 10,000 times or even more. This wasn't the time for these young experts to stir up troubles or put their lives on the line. So, a short-term failure had no consequence in anyone's opinion. Moreover, there would be many competitions on this road to invincibility. That would help them in understanding oneself clearly. It shouldn't be the strength but the heart that should be invincible. Only those experts who possessed invincible hearts would be able to walk on this road till the very end. No one could dare say that they were above everyone else. After all, there would always be someone stronger. But possessing an invincible heart would give one the power to surpass others. Yi Shiwen might not be a match for that Titan guy right now. Even so, nobody would belittle him for that. After all, Yi Shiwen was an outstanding talent, irrespective of the level of his current strength. Most people didn't say it out loud, but everyone had sharp eyes, and they had noticed this much for sure. That you're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.